Good morning. I'm getting to be an expert at pushing this button. I hope everyone recognizes my skill and cunning here. I actually got it to turn green on the first punch. Welcome to day 2. I thought yesterday was a very productive day. There are some cautions that the findings of this board are not official in any way until the board has agreed to them. I'm going to be giving a preliminary talk about comparisons of GNSS. Please regard all of my remarks this morning as being preliminary because I need your buy-in on what both the process of comparing GNSS might be as well as the metrics, and I'll explain that more when my time slot shows up. There have been some issues that have come up. I'd like to have John Betts perhaps comment on those issues, and then I think we have some opportunities to further clarify some things. So, John?
Yeah, thank you, Brad. Just to repeat some things that we stated yesterday during our presentation, in particular on the part where we were describing the work done by the subcommittee on augment. All of those results were labeled draft. They're the result of an initial assessment. They certainly have not been adopted or validated by the board at this point. They are initial and draft. As I mentioned yesterday, there's certainly an opportunity for people to provide additional inputs if there's information that we missed in doing that evaluation, but we would suggest that you look carefully at the criteria that we employed in order to do those initial assessments. And certainly if there are some candidate systems that would not consider themselves suited for some of the use case and prefer not to be evaluated for those use cases, we'd be happy to remove those evaluations as well. So again, we view this as the beginning of a conversation, not the end of a conversation. And so I think that we'll probably set something up where people can submit any comments or additional information, maybe to AJ Oria, who's part of our support staff here, and then the PTA subcommittee will take that information into account. Is that okay?
Sure, and thank you very much for that explanation, Dr. Betts and Dr. Parkinson. So just as a follow-on, this is our 30th meeting in 17 years, right? And we've always strived to allow not only our members, but the general public, the stakeholders, our constituents, to also provide input, right? That's very important to cast that net as wide as possible. So the actual PNT board website does have an email address on there where you can send in information. And so based on today's discussion, we'll take that a little bit further if there are some charts or some things put out there that the public really would like more of a say in. We would like that feedback because we certainly can go beyond what we have already presented and posted and solicit feedback so that at the next meeting we'll be prepared to kind of go through and see where we are in terms of our public feedback. So I just want to assure everyone that we're certainly not working in a vacuum. It remains very important for us to make sure that we're representing users as a whole. So thank you.
And the providers.
And the providers, of course. And my colleague, Karen Van Dyke from DOT has one more thing to add to that.
Yeah, thank you, JJ, and good morning, everyone. So I think with the charts, yesterday, and particularly the blanket of red that we saw, for all of the technologies for us in Department of Transportation and complementary PNT, we are very much embracing commercial PNT technologies to have PNT resiliency. And I think it's, it's important to recognize some of the challenges that these companies are facing. We held an industry roundtable back a couple years ago, and one of the big challenges is the fact that GPS is provided direct of any service fees within the United States. So that's a big hurdle to to overcome with these private companies, and some of these companies are publicly traded, and so I've certainly heard a lot of concerns of what was presented yesterday, and I think it's for us in DOT, we're really trying to ensure that we do have a diversity of PNT technologies, both space-based, terrestrial, and particularly that these commercial technologies are successful for our collective goal in having PNT resiliency, and there's no one size that fits all, and so we're very much looking forward for Department of Transportation setting up our complementary PNT test ranges to evaluate technologies to better understand the services that they can provide, and we just ask the board to keep in mind some of the challenges that these companies are facing, and the fact that they really do depend on investments, and the fact that again some of these companies are publicly traded, and the message that that is being conveyed by the blanket of red.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. I think the one thing that overriding all the evaluations we've made is it is certainly unfair to evaluate certain of the providers on the basis of something they never claimed that we wanted to do. And so I think we have to be cautious in throwing, even if we're trying to do complete things, throwing use cases out there that are simply were never suggested to be used for. So, stay tuned. I think we have to keep an open mind, and I'm delegating that to John and his group. But on the other hand, as AJ has said, we're going to cast a wide net in getting opinions and comments and criticisms, because I think that's where this board should be. Dana?
Yeah, just to add to that, sir, I appreciate that. And I had some immediate feedback last night that I shared with John at the event, and afterwards I got some more, and some more this morning, almost exclusively from terrestrial companies. And so I've sanitized the comments and sent them on to you and John and Jim. Generally and some of the companies are reluctant to send an email or be identified, quite frankly, and the underlying text there is they see this as the present space-based PNT advisory board, and they see a lot of space folks on the board, not very many terrestrial folks that they can see on the board, and so they want to be as circumspect as possible while at the same time expressing their concerns. So I think that's something that just generally we all need to keep in mind as we think about whether space-based needs to stay in our name when we do all of our work and when we consider things going forward.
The other item of business that's still floating around, and we're going to reserve it for our discussion towards the end of our morning. I would ask everyone to try to stay on schedule, starting with me, and that is to go back and revisit those recommendations that we came up with, either 5 or 6, depending on how you count. And I know at least one member fervently believes the ideal number is 1. Then there was a creative suggestion, maybe we could cram them all into 1, but I don't think that's going to quite work. Maybe we can combine some of them, though, and I think giving that a shot is worthwhile. Any opening comments that anyone else might have? If not, give me a minute, and I'll start. I am next. We're 5 minutes in. All right, can everyone hear me? Okay, the subject we're going to embark upon now is this issue of U.S. leadership. And I've got, I think, enough slides to explain exactly what we're talking about. But again, this also is draft, and there are clear marks of draft on the evaluation charts, and it is by no means, for the most part, these are things that a few of us have put our inputs into, but in almost all cases, I think we're going to need your inputs to help us get to anything that is a semblance of a final product. So the background, of course, is GPS is the historic pioneer and leader, and then we've had other GNSS systems and regional augmentations, but they all follow the same fundamental blueprint for satellites in view and using a CDMA signal. We've heard many times the term gold standard. There has been a lot of pushback on that particular term. Some have called it a marketing pitch. I'm not certain that I would call it that, but nonetheless, that's what has been used. But there does exist a concern that the leadership, whatever it means, is slipping. Is GPS the best? Should it be the best? And what the heck does best mean? The examples are Beto has more satellites, more signals, and more features perhaps. Galileo has a number of things that they are doing that are either operational or almost operational. So what can we do about all that? And then if we are trying to enhance GPS for our users, certainly the fact that we have not authorized the most effective counter, in my opinion, which is the phased array antennas for civil use, it begs the question of what are we going to do about that? And as you know, it is being worked on. Is Jeff here today? Hi, Jeff. Okay. So what I'm trying to do is get a consensus, first of all, on the structure of how we put this together in terms of goals. Goals are, in this context, not quantified things. They are perforce an explanation of what the national policy is, but not at a metric level. And then what are the metrics that we could use for this question of leadership? What's the current status, in our opinion, or in a draft form, against these criterion? And then what are the drivers? Because you have to amalgamate, in my opinion, if you're going to explain this to anyone, you have to put together the top-level metrics in such a way that they're clearly driven by all kinds of features of a system. And what are those specific drivers? Because that's where the specific decisions are made. And in looking at those capabilities, understanding exactly what those drivers are, and getting that status. So the recommendations that I hope to eventually come out with, and it's certainly not ready to do that today, is the interpretation of the policy, what the XCOM ought to do about it, in our humble opinion, and then perhaps influencing government resource allocations and direction, because that's ultimately where we go. So here is the little chart that explains what we are all about. Starting on the upper left, there is a statement of national policy. I'm going to give you a recommended criterion for evaluating that, and then perform such an evaluation so you'd see how that might turn out. Frankly, I have some concerns about the criterion that we've drafted up. I'm not certain that we're hitting the right things, but on the other hand, if you try to put in too many criterion, the message gets lost. So I think it's incumbent on us to try to keep that top-level evaluation to some kind of an acceptable and absorbable level. And then coming down on the lower right, what are the technical and policy drivers of those capabilities? And then attempting an evaluation among GNSS systems, which leads in turn to basic recommendations. Our first recommendation is, this is a way to look at it, and we would recommend the way to look at it. And the second is specifics, depending upon what you choose to have as a goal, specifics as to what actions might be taken to further enhance carrying out that goal. So let's start out at that upper left level, national policy, and this is straight out of the policy statement of 2021, government, president, and that's to maintain United States leadership in the service provision and responsible use of GNSS, including GPS and foreign systems. That's the statement. And that's what we're trying to elaborate on. Within the document, there's also a stated rationale, but the rationale really amounts to the fact that they recognize that PNT is a very important element of national power. I'm not certain they recognize it as fervently as we would, but on the other hand, I think it is recognized generally that it is part of our critical infrastructure. So, considering that policy, what should our goal be? What does leadership mean? And I've offered some alternatives here. A general goal would be Foundation for Assured PNT. I personally find that a little vague. Alternative B would be worldwide recognition that GPS is the leader. Well, that's pretty strong. What about alternative B1 there, which is that GPS is not exceeded by anyone in the capability, and there is a distinction. I mean, there's some tie games that are allowed in that particular way of stating the goal. Alternative C, which has been offered to me, assured PNT civil mission capability, and I look at C and I say, well, that's kind of like A. Maybe those should be included together. And then at the bottom is something I call alternative X, in which we dream up some other statement. But in my opinion, A and C should probably be combined, and that our goals, in my thinking about it, should be a combination of all three, stated in some succinct and nice way. Now, an important point that has been made is whether you're achieving that or not depends a lot on where you sit. And so in terms of civilian, military, scientific, or commercial, there are apt to be some very different views on precisely how we interpret this. So I'll let you think about that, and we're going to come back hopefully with enough time. But as you're sitting there, if you would jot down what you think the goal is, hopefully we'll eventually come to some kind of a consensus. So this simply describes something you understand quite well, but I'm going to put this up there because I would like you to understand what we're focusing on. The government enablers of space-based PNT, GPS, WAS, regulations, laws, that's partially our focus. And then the specs and permissions, in terms of where those go, they go to equipment manufacturers. The details of the things they do are not included. And in turn, they produce equipment. We're not getting down to that level. On the other hand, the signals, the ranging, the corrections, the integrity, we think that's all legitimately on the table as the providers. And then ultimately, that turns out to be the driver of accurate, available, and high integrity PNT. Those are the payoffs. Those are the enablers for the payoffs of safety, productivity, and convenience. So having shown you all that, we also should add, we think the system capabilities from space include the other GNSS, and that's legitimately on the table in terms of what we're focusing on. On the other hand, non-government augmentations, those are important, but that's not what we're discussing here because by and large that is not in our job jar. Now I will tell you something else in terms of the comparisons. I have deliberately omitted GLONASS. I frankly I don't know what the other opinions might be around the table, but I don't think GLONASS is a serious contender or competitor in the kind of arena we're talking about right here. So now let's move ahead, go back to that same process, and the red box is looking at potential criterion for evaluating the top-level leadership. And some comments. When you evaluate it, how do you evaluate whatever we're going to say? System specs tend to be conservative because people who are committing to do something want to give themselves some margin. Specifically right now on GPS, I think is URE, isn't it like 3 meters? I think the accuracy, ranging signal accuracy is like 3 meters, and the public statement of what that actually is under 0.5 meter. So the point is, that's an example of a specification which is really not what's being provided to the user. So how should we look at that? Should we look at what's actually coming down? Of course, on the other hand, what's coming down might actually be greater. But at any rate, I think I've explained that and explained why we have to be very careful on what number, if we're going to get quantified, we're actually going to use. And then what are the bases for these assessments? And again, are we going to use the current, or are we going to use what's planned, what's apt to be there in a year or 3 years or whatever? We have to sort all that out, I think, in terms of our thinking. And then if we turn around as our goal, have something on the order of world acceptance, how on earth do we measure that? It's an interesting parameter. I suppose you could go out and start counting receivers, but candidly, almost all the receivers being manufactured today can listen to virtually everything. So right away, that is not a terribly accurate measure of world acceptance. And then there's some qualitative measures that enter into this discussion. Openness, when we have incidents with our GNSSs, how open are the providers to actually telling us what's going on and how it will be fixed? We all have examples that have been looking at this for any length of time of perhaps less than satisfactory openness on the part of some of the providers. And but how do we put that into the hopper? I honestly don't know. So let's jump right in now and look at possible criteria. And you notice draft is highlighted across this. Again, we ask ourselves, when evaluating it, are you talking about what it is right now, what it's going to be tomorrow, or perhaps an inkling somebody has of something that's going to be here in 10 years? Global availability of accuracy. That looks like it's up there somewhere. Horizontal and vertical, the combined signal in space, ranging error, DOP. All of you know those parameters are things that go into the calculation or the evaluation of such things. This should probably, in my opinion, include dual frequency operation. When we use URE, apparently it does not include the effects of the ionosphere. And so for the user, he doesn't care where the error comes from. All he knows is it isn't giving a very nice answer or not good enough for him. So we think dual signal operation should certainly be in this if this is a measure that we want to use. We also put in here any restrictions on receiver design, and you know exactly why I would put something like that in there for reasons I've been shouting from the hilltops for about the last 5 years, and that is that restrictions on what a provider can give the user, and I'm thinking specifically of phased array antennas, is perhaps not well thought out. The second is global robustness, resistance to jamming and spoofing. That relates to what the signals actually are. By and large, we've, in terms of those characteristics, There are various classes of signals depending on spreading and how they are actually provided. Those all help in jamming, and obviously satellite power is a major input to that. But also there are measures that the provider can use against spoofing. And we are aware of those. We've discussed them many times. We have some advocates for that. And interestingly, the Europeans have apparently already started to put these authentication pieces into their signal, and the consequence of doing that is a user, if they want to use that information, is less susceptible to spoofing. What about global integrity? Integrity is a system lying without telling me it's lying? Is a system out of spec without my being, as a user, without my being notified? And that includes such things as time to alarm. Those of you who have studied WAS know that the FAA self-imposed spec there is within 6 seconds, you're going to, if you're listening to the WAS signal, there is a set of flags. And if that flag goes from 1 to 0 on a given satellite, you're going to hear about it within 6 seconds. That's rather phenomenal, but I believe that that's exactly how that system is being managed, and from all appearances it seems to work extremely well. But that's part of what global integrity might be. The fourth is the number of operational civil signals and the number of frequencies. It seems to me that's a little redundant with number one, but on the other hand, it's separate, it's quantifiable, it's readily understood. Maybe it belongs on there. And then here's other features. Whatever you as a board might invent or throw on the table. Some secondary measures that are being offered here. Dataless acquisition signal. Integrated correction service. You could conceivably take the WAS corrections and actually embed them in some way within the GPS signal. As a matter of fact, that's sort of what FAA does, because it turns out the WAS signal is also a ranging signal. You could do that uniformly across the globe. It would instantly raise some system engineering questions about how you would implement it, where the information comes from, and then misdetection and false alarm, the classic two things that always worry anybody that has an indicator and is going to use that as a flag. Published ratings of robustness and competence. We had a very nice discussion on techniques that we might encourage on regarding robustness and competence. Maybe that belongs in here somewhere. Availability of HAR, the HAR corrections. This board is, I think, on the verge of making a recommendation regarding HAR. Does that belong on this list? Does it rise to that point? I don't know. Time to first fix is a classic parameter. It's often in the hands of the designer of the equipment as much as anything else, but nonetheless, perhaps a contender. So there's a set of possible, and now let's just take that trial set that I gave. And again, excluding GLONASS, we'll go into our classic color chart here. Blue is lovable and wonderful, and red is inadequate and bad. And in between we have yellow and green. And we're going to make some judgments here. And again, you notice draft is plastered all over this. And in terms of the capabilities, relative capabilities, we can start with global availability of accuracy. GPS we're putting down yellow because the L5 is not available. There's no high accuracy service, and yet Galileo is apparently deploying it or about to deploy such a capability. BeiDou also is advertising that they're doing that, and of course they have B2 operational, at least by their declaration. Global robustness, resistance to jamming. GPS is marked down because of the unavailability of dual of nulling antennas. and no plan now for an authentication message. L5 is not operational again. And Galileo, we're not certain what those user restrictions are, but what we do know is that the Turkish people, the company, is it Tualcom? Tualcom is actually selling a 16-element antenna, advertising it, as a matter of fact, I think, at GPS World Magazine. So it's clearly available. So we ended up giving them a green, and then the Beidou have 3 operational civil signals, and they ended up green. Global integrity, GPS marked very highly. I think they've gone to a lot of effort to provide both WAS and a understanding of when they're out of spec. And if you've looked at the way TUSOPS operates, they try to rapidly take offline any satellite that is misbehaving. EGNOS apparently has a similar capability. Beidou has a short messaging capability. I'm not certain how that is used. It's quite difficult, frankly, to find out exactly where the Chinese system stands. We recently got some information that should be incorporated into this. Number of operational civil signals, the 4th row down, and number of civil frequencies. Unfortunately, GPS is not yet broadcasting the L5, and we have some planned, but they're not there yet. And there's a lot of barriers to that in terms of using it, particularly by FAA, but nonetheless, we come down there with a blue on that. A green on that. And I'm not certain that green is deserved. I think we have to look and see whether indeed they have achieved a true operational capability from the vantage point of the user. And then Beidou has claimed 35 operational satellites. As we can tell, that is where they are. 3 signals at 3 frequencies. And then there's some other measures and features that are sometimes deemed important. Search and rescue support has begun for the GPS, but Galileo and Beidou apparently have it already operational. I'm going to pause for just a minute. I will take comments on this chart and preliminary comments, because we're going to have to probably spend a lot of time contemplating what belongs on here. Yes, Tim?
Yeah, I have a suggestion for another metric, and that would be what I would call out-of-band information support. So I'm thinking of the NavSend website, where I can get real-time information about the status of the constellation without actually having to listen to the constellation. And I'm not sure all the systems do that, or what the status of that is, but I think that's an important thing to the user.
A good comment. AJ, can I get you to make certain I don't forget comments? You've got that one recorded, I presume. Any other specifics, quibbles, initial rocks that you would like to throw at this chart? All right.
Oh, sorry.
Here comes a rock.
No, not a rock. And maybe it's in here, but the inherent accuracy of the signal, which is very strongly related to the chipping rate. So the pseudo range, and we've got data that shows that, for years now there's been things where GLONASS has a 600-meter correlation peak triangle, GPS L1CA 300 meters, Beidou 150. So the steeper your correlation peak, the more accurate your pseudo-range, your basic pseudo-range measurement on the ground, and there's 1-for-1 correspondence. Is that, and in L5 is better, of course, than L1 for GPS, but is that represented here?
No, it is not stated up here, because I'm going to go to a second level that are the specific capabilities that feed these conceptual comparisons, and so in my opinion, such a comment belongs on the second similar chart, which are the features, the decisions, policies that in turn drive these top level things.
Right, but I think it belongs in accuracy, and I don't see signal design as part of the accuracy. Because that does, and in general comment, I feel like the board tends to over-index on the system in space numbers. And I understand if, when the Space Force gives their specs, and the same for Galileo and so on, they show those numbers, which they should, because that's their job. But we don't use the receivers in space. We use them on the ground, and so it's the received accuracy that matters. And the system in space accuracy is just a small component of that, and actually the minority component of the error.
I quite agree. And
so I feel like signal design is a very important part of the global availability of accuracy, and at L5 everyone's kind of reached similar quality of signal design, but that should be represented because GPS does fall in yellow again because L5 not operational. So
exactly. AJ, you captured signal design as one of the possible parameters. Matt, did you have a comment?
Okay. I was just going to, I think it's worth saying, this is the table that's in the memo, the draft memo. So the idea is to try and get it all on one table for top-level decision makers. So there's a lot of tension between that of how much to put in and keep it simple. And so I'm just giving context of that. But then the idea is we would have a white paper that also fleshes stuff out. Some specific comments, Brad, I think I mentioned it in my email to you, but it's still the authentication message on Galileo is shown in integrity, whereas authentication for GPS is shown under resistance to jamming. So the Galileo authentication message is for spoofing, isn't it? So it should be upper column, upper row, that's all.
Okay, the operational integrity message that is being talked about here is Chimera or whatever. What do they call it? They call it OS7. Okay. So that was what was meant by that, and perhaps
but it's about resistance to spoofing. Shouldn't it be upper row?
All right.
Yeah, that's all. And then Beidou, for example, does have an SBAS type developing capability that we probably need to reflect somewhere as well. But yeah,
okay, well,
there's a few little details
since you're
like
going to take over this chart, I'm going to... So, good comments, good comments. Yeah, Tom?
First of all, the word Baidu is misspelled. And second,
yes, it is.
For robustness, first of all, one of the bullets there is number of signals, which is repeated down below, which isn't included for the other systems. And second, what remains is antenna restrictions unknown, and I'm not sure that unknown earns a green. The U.S. clearly has the ITAR issue, but both for Galileo and Beidou, it's kind of unknown, and I'm not sure that earns a green. Second comment for...
excuse me, which square are you referring to?
Second row for Beidou, what's listed as antenna restrictions unknown, right, and then 3 open signals, blah, blah, which I think goes in the lower row. So if you move that down, what's left for Beidou for robustness is unknown antenna restrictions. And I'm not sure that earns you a green.
You're pointing out if you were looking at this to be kind of a flow down in which each characteristic is in exactly one box, that is not where this comes from. In many cases, there are capabilities at a technical level that are feeding more than one of these evaluations. So, and I just threw a couple of bullets in there. Indeed, the ones you're suggesting, I think, deserve refinement, and I'm open to that.
And then one other comment, the signals for GPS, there are actually 4 civil signals for GPS.
That's true.
So I think there's one missing.
All right, so again, yes, Jeff, please.
First of all, this chart, Brad, is, I think, dramatically improved over earlier iterations that we saw, so thank you for the effort that's gone into that. This might be a dumb question, but I go back to when the United States decided as a matter of policy to eliminate selective availability, just make the signal available in its most robust form to everybody. Do we know whether there are similar decisions for Galileo and Beidou? Is there a better signal that is restricted, that is not being made available to the public by either of those systems?
The answer is yes, and the answer is yes for GPS. GPS still has a military signal whose precision, because of the chipping rate, is better and is more resistant to jamming. However, we are focusing here on strictly the civil capability. And if you're asking the question of whether the Galileo has hidden somewhere a switch that they can throw and wiggle the signal, I honestly don't know. I suspect they don't. On the other hand, Beidou, I have no idea of whether they might have such an ability. It would not surprise me.
My comment on that, I guess, Jeff, would be that both of those systems came after selective availability was already turned off, if you like. So the baseline was already reset for them to go from, would be the way I'd describe that.
Okay, there's some more meaty stuff coming, but go ahead, Tim first, and then...
Yeah, another potential discriminator is what I would say political commitment, in the sense that the U.S. many, many years ago submitted a letter to ICAO offering the use of satellite navigation with some guarantees on 7 years notice before we turn it off and things like that. And I believe Europe followed that up with a paper, or they did their own letter like that, but I'm not sure that there's been a similar sort of political commitment by Beidou or GLONASS.
This is a good point, and it relates to openness and clarity of what they're providing. You recall I waved my hands a little bit on that at the beginning. AJ, if you would capture that as a potential for the list of global metrics, and who's next? Dana.
Yes, sir. On the global integrity line, does the embedded authentication message with Galileo benefit all users, and does WASP benefit all users on GPS? And if not, is there a disparity there?
Specified WAS is in the United States. Okay,
right,
for openers. What your second question is, does the authentication message, can anyone use it? Is that the question?
Does everybody get that?
It's my belief they can.
Yes, everybody can use it, and they've set up servers to provide you with a security patrol. I did want to follow up on one of Matt's comments. Security is not always about security. A lot of what the Europeans are doing with Galileo is to, in a sense, force you to use their system because there's a requirement that you use an authenticated signal. Okay, and so the U.S. not having an authenticated signal, essentially what you've said to the European user is, by law, you must use Galileo.
I think that point probably belongs on the next specific charts. JJ, did you have something?
Yes, sir, thank you. So just looking at your bottom row here, and you call out search and rescue, which of course is in SPD 7 and presidential directives prior to that. I think a really important area we've made much progress in is in the space service volume, right? That was initially in the CDD from 3,000 kilometers up to GEO. SPD 7 explicitly calls out for us to look at use of GPS along with other systems such as Galileo into the cislunar space domain. And so there's going to be at least a decade before we build out infrastructure for lunar missions. That means that this is the incremental step, right? Everyone's going to be adopting to use GNSS, and Jeff Auerbach from State Department clearly articulated yesterday that this has become a priority of the UN because every single global constellation out here now has a space service volume. So I think it's important to note.
Well, it's important. My tendency, and by the way, Thank you, you and Jeff and all those who you labored very hard. And I think initially there was resistance, not only overseas, there was resistance here in this country. And if you recall, I don't know if General Thompson is here today, but General Thompson took out his sword and he cut that knot in two. And fortunately he did, so that the U.S. could pioneer, as I understand it, the space service volume specification and acceptance of what we do, including some knowledge of what power was being transmitted in the side lobes. So to me, that's all great. The only question is, would it result in a discriminator? And if we're all doing it, then although it's a wonderful characteristic, it doesn't help us in making a comparison because the world is doing it. So think about it. If you want to come back at me on that, I'm more than willing to listen. All right. Brian?
Okay. Not a rock, just a pebble. The second row, talk about resistance to jamming, spoofing. May I suggest just a kind of opening the aperture and using the word interference, which includes jamming and spoofing. The second row, resistance to jamming and spoofing. So my suggestion would be to expand the aperture to include just interference, which includes jamming and spoofing. And so what I mean by that, from the perspective of the civil user, there's other interference, right? Such as tree cover, right? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, when I look at your legend on the top, right, it says meets modern expectations is in green. And I understand modern expectations is that can change over time, right? What the user expects.
Absolutely. Okay, AJ, have you got that? Good man. All right. If no one objects, I'd like to try to get to the end. Has anyone got a burning comment that they want to give me before I push the button here? All right. So now we're going to get down to the nitty-gritties, and this is clearly an incomplete but rather long list. And here, and I've tried to divide it into two categories, and frankly, that was hard too. This is sort of the current capabilities and policies, specifics that drive some of those parameters. And L5 or equivalent, L2C and L1C are picked up here for whoever made that comment on the multiple civil signals. Laser retroreflectors, ITAR restrictions, free broadcast PPP data, precise point positioning data, which is the HAR. Rapid updates, which really relates frankly to clock stability. And search and rescue and embedded authentication. I'm just listing these. We're going to have another similar rainbow chart in a minute. And then what I am choosing to call advanced capabilities or policy. Now, again, let me say, this list could go to 100 items. Obviously, what we want on here are things that are both important and are discriminators. So think about that in terms of completeness. Regional geosynchronous overlay, two-way data rate transmission, two-way short messaging, including SAR confirmation message, emergency warning and integrity service, GPS light with 3 or 4 per booster. And the reason that gets on the list is it relates to how many satellites you're going to have up there under some kind of an affordability constraint. And locating and shutting down jammers, and then 14 is all the rest of the things you can think about. No, they are not prioritized. They are absolutely not. That would be even more contentious than the list itself. So let me ask you to do the following. Just think about other major drivers of those top-level metrics, and think if we've got something that belongs on here. This and what I'm going to show you next are not what you show the high-level people in government, in my opinion. If asked, you can whip these charts out, but otherwise, let's move on with our process. Now I'm going to really go out on a limb because I'm going to do a comparison among those drivers and excluding GLONASS, all the rest of them. And I don't know if it's worthwhile to go through these one row at a time or not, but L5 we've discussed extensively. I've gotten information, maybe 25 for the IOC, 28 for certification, and of course our recommendation is that they turn off the unusable bit as quickly as possible. Laser retroreflectors, in my opinion, this is a very, very sad story. People that don't know, we had such things. We had retroreflectors in phase 1, and they since disappeared. They are not terribly expensive in terms of swap, and yet somehow they keep getting kicked down the I think they're certainly on 9 and maybe they're on 8. I'm subject to amendment and rethinking that if it's wrong. Removing ITAR restrictions. Hopefully that will occur this year. I always pick on Jeff. Sorry about that. HAR. And the question is, how long would it take us to get HAR online? And this may be a pessimistic number. It could be that people can visualize ways to do that more quickly. Rapid updates. We did get some really good news. I did when we spoke with the people at TUSOPS, and they informed us they are doing I would say an enlightened update in which if a satellite is acting up because of more rapid drift in the clock or whatever, they have a mechanism and a procedure that actually will update that down to something like 2 hours. And the point is to hold down what the signal in space accuracy, or to maintain good accuracy with the signal in space. And they showed us some data. I don't know if they're publicizing it, so I won't tell you the numbers, but that seemed to indicate that this was really a smart thing to do and really helping. SAR, enough said on that, I think. Embedded authentication. And then these are the more advanced capabilities, and candidly, these are more controversial. And in some cases, these are not necessarily things that one might want to do. Regional geosynchronous overlay. I can see a lot of good reasons and uses for that. There are no plans, in my knowledge, of why does it say funded? I don't know why it's funded. I don't think that's funded. Does anyone know if it's funded? Huh? Yeah, but it's not a full signal capable satellite. You're right, it is. But two-way high data rate inter-satellite laser or RF communications. I think we have a limited capability to do that, but certainly not at the high comm rate that BEDAO advertised. I don't know if I've heard any confirmation, but I believe they're claiming that they do that. Pardon me? Okay, they do have it. Two-way short message. Oh, by the way, a lot of these comparisons are very murky and difficult. And the reason they are is finding something on the web that's not simply advertising, but actually is a user-oriented assessment of what is being broadcast and what is being done. And I think, among other things, my recommendation that next time we try to pull together such charts, but have a lot more to back them up. Some of you were very kind, in particular Matt and I forget somebody else, sent me some pages that were the official position of the European system. I frankly have not incorporated all that into here yet. I have to do this in my spare time. Emergency warning and integrity, GPS light, locating and shutting down jammers. We put all those on there as national policy things that can help. Tim, please.
Last line, I think you want to expand to also include, I don't know how to say this delicately, competence at protecting the spectrum, our legal support for protecting the systems. I mean,
yes,
I'm thinking
there
of
is
the
a whole.
differences.
You're quite right, and then there's a whole bunch of stuff. Once you hook that fish, you get the whole school.
Yeah.
And I think all those deserve to be added. Now, obviously, everyone here, and in particular the groups that are assigned to doing that under Matt, are going to have another cut at this, many more cuts, I think. So that was the start that I'm offering, and a technique for trying to bring capabilities at the nuts and bolts decision level up to affect those metrics that we put in on the top. So that gets down to basic recommendations and specifics. I have none to make, and because it's premature and this hasn't been through everything we wanted to discuss and gather in terms of information, but it brings up these questions. What are the keys? Who determines the best way to maintain and achieve them? Who takes responsibility for them? We gave a list of GPS improvements. Who's responsible for exploring and advocating such things? How should they be funded? Has the civil arm contributed its share to the operation? I know that DOT has tried to do that. If I'm not mistaken, Karen, you can shut me up if you want to, but as I understand it, DOT puts in a healthy rental fee or something into their budget, and OMB usually takes it out. I don't know where that stands now, or takes most of it out. Please.
Yeah, well, in accordance with space-based PNT policy, both the current one and the previous one, it is really segregated for capabilities that are truly designated for civil use or spelled out in the space policy directive. So an example is monitoring of the civil GPS signals, and we have spent over $80 million on OCX to get monitoring of the civil signals, and then also partnering with NGA for the Delta for capabilities we couldn't get into OCX. And then we also funded, I think it was also on the order of $80 million for the L1C signal. So it's either, capabilities that are designated for civil use, or, above and beyond what the military would provide. But it's not an annual budget for the operation of GPS.
Well, I think the question that is perhaps suggested here is if additional capabilities, such as Chimera, or whatever the other abbreviation is to mean that, if that is deemed needed and has to obviously be pushed in through an OCX type of interface, who bears the cost of inserting it? And it sounds like, according to your definition, that would be borne by DOT, and then you'd get into a dispute with DOD on how much that really is costing.
Yeah, I mean, we've initiated the studies on that, so there's really two components. The near term is the out-of-band authentication, and I think that ties into the HARS concept. The longer term is the embedded authentication that you talked about. So we have initiated studies with the Space Force to see what it would take for that to occur, and also, to your point, how much it would cost. And then I think that is a decision we bring up to the executive steering group in the XCOM to then determine how to execute and ensure that there are resources to do so.
Fair enough. Yes, JJ, please.
Yeah, while we're on this slide, I want to respectfully push back on the space service volume, because we are now heading towards the UN once again, and China is very prominently talking about how their space service volume is so much better because of the number of satellites they have in their constellation. They have 35 plus, including GEOs. They have much better availability and coverage than we do. We were talking about earlier coordinated lunar time, which OSTP just put out for DOT and NASA and other agencies to work. So there's going to be a continued connection between what we're doing in the terrestrial aviation and space domain into the cislunar domain. And I think if we don't nail it down now, we're going to be doing it at the next meeting anyway.
I have absolutely no objection to putting that on that list. We'll put it on there. To me, a major issue is whether they can accurately characterize the back lobes and side lobes that come off their satellites and provide them freely and openly to the world. We can go with that. Thank you. And we've captured that. Yes, Matt?
Just on that, JJ, I think throughout all of this, it's about showing the leadership, and I think the US has done a lot of leadership in the space service volume, so it should be captured. So definitely, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. And whether you maintain leadership is the other issue. Yeah. But I think we should be showing both sides of the coin in all of this.
Okay.
The other thing, Brad, just to capture, I guess, for partly AJ, back right at the start, you talked about horizontal and vertical accuracy. We probably need, one thing I've been thinking, we need timing accuracy given the PNT.
I'm certainly open to that.
Yeah,
yep,
I think we need to just go through it, some of it again with a timing lens.
Yeah, all 4 dimensions.
Yeah.
I have encouraged dialogue as we go along. I'm more comfortable with that, and I think it also ensures we don't drop something inadvertently. But the issue then comes down to these points, and I don't expect us to solve this problem. As you can sense, this is not an easy thing. And so here are some of the questions that we need to ask ourselves, and I hope if we next time devote our full meeting to a combination of this and the governance issue, because the governance issue is at the heart of what you do about this, I think we'll have made some good progress. So U.S. goals, what are they? What should the top-level criterion be? What's the status right now? Can we defend the numbers or the judgments? Because those colors in that first set of that first colored chart, those colors were put on by me and kibitzing from John Betts, but I'll take all the slings and arrows if they're wrong. Those have to be reevaluated, obviously. Current status, specific drivers, and then the status of the specific drivers. Now, the number one question, in my opinion, for what I'm telling you, does this structure fly? Do you think this approach works in terms of trying to somehow answer this tough question of where do the GNSS stand and what one is it as a consequence and what should we do about it? Does this structure that I've shown you, are you comfortable with it as a board? Does it seem to work? Or thanks, Jeff.
You know, it's raising a very important question in my mind as to exactly how we approach this with the government that we are charged with advising. Just imagine for a moment that we are the government. You receive a charge along the lines of what you're proposing from the National Security Council or the Space Council or whomever. But we're actually all members of agencies that now have to implement. How do we do it? It becomes a very complicated process. These are the right questions to ask, perhaps. So we have to start making assignments. it becomes a very complicated process of implementing a policy change along these lines. This is what would have to happen within government if we were to toss our recommendations along the lines that we've been discussing over the wall. Is it realistic to think that that's a way to influence anything? My thought is rather, the sooner we can begin to engage our sponsoring agencies in a dialogue, suggesting that these are the questions that should be asked. Are you asking these questions of yourselves? And instead of recommending the answers, instead of defining a PNT nirvana that we dream up and then throw over the wall, can we encourage a process whereby the government does that itself in the hopes that it will reach conclusions that make sense for the United States and for the world?
And what's your answer to that question?
I think we should be engaging them. I think we should engage them before we provide them all the answers to the questions. I think we need an assurance that there is an interest in asking these questions of itself. We all saw the timeline at Schriever the other day. A lot of this stuff is already baked in. The kinds of capabilities that you're talking about, do we know, are some of them in the pipeline? Are we saying accelerate those? Are some of them not in the pipeline? Are we saying put them in the pipeline? I mean, I don't know.
No, we haven't said anything like that yet.
No, that's my point.
This was just the preamble to hopefully us then turning to the ESG and saying, look, it appears we have this as our status. It's been looked at by the experts in GNSS here and getting information from others. And based on that, we think we are behind. We think there are following things that you might consider doing about it. And the only problem I'm having with what you're saying, it's perfectly logical, is it's going to promote another 2 years delay before we get anywhere. And I'm impatient. I won't be around. It just doesn't work for me. What I've done here is an attempt to jump ahead to the point that we can say, look, if Mr. Leader, Mr. XCOM leaders, particularly the two leaders, this is where we assess our status is. If your policy is you don't care, okay, then we don't have much we can do about it. But if you do care, because it's an element of national power, we suggest these are the areas in which you have to emphasize, add more money or more crisp and earlier decisions. And that, frankly, is in our charter. That's what I think we are told to do. So I don't know if I'm disagreeing with you or saying let's do it quicker or...
I don't think we're disagreeing about what the end game is. The end game is improved PNT. The question in my mind, and I'll stop, is simply, are we just going to throw recommendations over the wall, or are we going to engage in a process that might actually produce a more coherent response? Because we're plugging our recommendations into a process that already exists.
Is my mic on?
You're good, sir.
Go for it.
Yeah. You're both right. Let me, and I apologize for not being there. Let me tell you how I've been going through this, and I've had several iterations with JJ, Brad, and other folks. We need to have this conversation being had at the deputy level. And you're absolutely right. We can't fix it from where we're at. It's a large and complicated issue, but it's our duty to provide advice on the current status of what's happening, where we think we know what's going on, where there's uncertainty, and how we need to move forward. What I'd like to see coming out of this meeting is a cause for action for the deputies to actually get involved. And that's by raising questions that may not have answers yet, but we're the subject matter experts to raise the issues and say they're not solvable right now, and it could be attributable to, and I agree early on, it's probably largely attributable to the governance structure that's set up in SPD 7. That doesn't mean we shouldn't make a recommendation on how to move forward. So I would say that both Brad and Jeff are correct on this. What we need is a way to communicate the conversation we just had to the deputies, and I'm prepared to put my personal signature on it and force the issue. We just have to agree on what's good enough to send to them to start the conversation. Thanks.
Okay, let me try to wrap this up. I'm supposed to be off the stage in 4 minutes, am I? Is that, as I recall? So my hope was, as GNSS experts, what we were doing is providing a reasonably sound logical basis for this comparison of where we stand, both relative to our purpose of providing assured PNT and whatever policy or purpose we have in terms of not being outflanked, outstripped, second to other GNSSs. Both of those are noble goals, and if you recall, they were wrapped into that first level of interpretation at the beginning. And I don't know if we buy into that yet, but there it is. Well, let me wrap it up with my conclusion. I think some aspect of leadership in PNT is both desirable because it's stated, but I think it's also desirable because it is truly an element of national power. And some of the other operators of systems absolutely get this. So if this version of leadership is a goal, we have suggested a way to assess it. It is not a perfect way, and it never will be, because it depends on how you weight the various aspects of what you're providing, the degree to which you're going to take credit for things you are thinking about or have in the pipeline, et cetera. So the last statement that we have up here, which relates to, I think, what Jeff is bringing up, is independent of us screaming in the wood, out in the forest somewhere. Whatever we come up with in terms of recommendations, to the degree that they are accepted, clearly they have to be backed up with resources and decisions. So my recommendation is this, and that is that at our next meeting, we combine the leadership process of evaluation with the governance issues. They are commingled in my mind, in part because any outcome from this has to go through some kind of a governance structure if it's going to happen, and that we do this under Jeff and Matt. We have to worry about dates here in terms of making certain Matt is here, but what I am proposing is, if you accept the generalized structure, independent of small adjustments we might make, if you accept that the board consensus is, let's delve into this in greater depth. We've all had a chance, perhaps, to think about it at our next meeting. There's my recommendation. It doesn't have to go any further than here. Yes, Matt?
Just to also clarify, but my understanding is the Admiral's plan is still to put up the draft memo as soon after this meeting is still the plan.
I think that's right.
In which case, this discussion today may tweak the table that's in that memo, and then presumably we assume that goes well, the memo, and therefore the next meeting makes sense to go into the next level of detail because we've got some buy-in from above. Is that a reasonable way forward?
Yeah, I can link to my letter what we're going to do to the next meeting. Absolutely happy to do that. It makes all the sense in the world.
So you're right. Your inputs have caused modifications to that top-level comparison, and I'm certain it will be labeled as a draft because, frankly, I think we all need time to see if the categories are right and are worthwhile. Okay. Does anyone object to this? All right, done deal. I think I can get off the stage now. Thank you for your kind attention.
Yeah, just let me add, we need to freeze where we're at so I can make the communication with the caveat that it is a work in progress and will be continued at the next meeting. But at some point, we have to stop and say, this is what we've got now. You should know what we're working on, and I need to send that forward.
I think we're at the point we can adjust that top-level chart based on the inputs I've got, and that's good enough for something that's labeled draft. I'm hoping everyone agrees with that. I don't see any objections, so thanks for your kind attention.
Folks, I'm going to have to jump off here. I got other stuff going on, but I just want to thank you all for the hard work and sticking with us. We're on the right road here. If it was easy, it would be done by now, and I want to just thank everybody for their part in this. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Admiral.
And gals.
And I believe we are now on a 15-minute break.
With the power invested in me, I declare a 15-minute break, and we get back at 10:30.
That was a good job. I mean, that was a little tap dance, but had to be done.
Hey, Brad, little insight on the crosslinks on Baydoe. Their clocks are absolutely correct. Okay.
Also, they need them to
Okay,
update.
and so what they installed was a K8 band crosslink. It's actually to about 5 inches at the time.
Okay, half a nanosecond or something.
So over the last 5 years, there's just been dramatic improvements in clock stability, or current clock stability of the system. And it's not because their clocks are any better, it's because they've got a crosslink.
Of course, it also makes their system a little fragile.
Agree. You know, I'm just
I didn't
pointing out
realize
that's how they do that. And
That's
then
interesting.
the other thing is that the Chinese do plan to put in simple authentication features.
Okay.
On good authority. They haven't announced anything.
You're going to be what I call the last guy out of the typewriter.
Thank you. said the same thing to DT the other night when he said, someone, I think it was Russell that asked him the question about, why aren't they responding to us? And he goes, well, they don't understand what we're saying. That's why, because we're speaking a language they don't understand. It's on us, not on them.
No, it's on them because they're in a position where they should understand.
But when we walk in with engineering,
but we don't have
they're not technical people. They're going to glaze over. We have to understand the economic impact of what our units change. That's on us.
Yeah. Why are we showing all these pictures?
Well, because they're a view grab.
Take a look. I'll send it back to you. Again, I'd love to.
Yeah, we're all in that.
I'll send it to Sarah. I'll send it to you. I'll make sure it's up to Okay, got it.
Okay. That's the attention step.
That's your workout.
I'm trying to see if the carpal tunnel thing really works. Oh, no, that's taken. That's taken. Right, John? That's what they call you.
When I was a young maintenance officer in Dallas,
How about sledge?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. I want to get at least more than a quorum. It looks like we're there. The next thing on the agenda is to go through our international members and representatives. Hopefully, they will stay on time and give us a little time. At the end, we have to go back and revisit our next meeting in terms of locale and in terms of date. But that's not for now. Matt, please, Australian update.
Thank you. So, given I said I was going to go on holidays to Europe, I probably should say bonjour rather than g'day, but next slide, please. So my talk today, I'm just going to cover a bit of a report on the IGNSS conference in Sydney in February, because there was a significant US involvement, which is worth highlighting. Update on South Pan, although not much has changed since we only had a meeting back in December. And then some other points around some space agency grants, including a follow-up from Houston and a new item. So next slide, please. So IGNSS 2024 was in February in Sydney. Next slide. We have a policy of encouraging early career professionals. So we invited these 4 speakers. But seriously, Brad opened the conference with his now completely memorised 50th anniversary talk, but he did do some nice little Australian additions that I thought were very good, and it started the conference off beautifully. Jade and Brian were there in person and presented on Jade around ionospheric issues and others, and Brian obviously on sonar and what's going on with LEO PNT. Frank also presented remotely and was a really good talk on the use of the South Pan precise positioning over the internet service that Frank and his team have done some testing in Google. So that was really, really well received and is leading to more cooperation, I think, between Google and Geoscience Australia and New Zealand, which will be great. And I'll talk a bit more about that PPP later when I talk about South Pan. So next slide, please. The other point was we also had, due to the great work of Rick Hamilton and Jeff Auerbach, we had a CGSIC meeting attached within the conference, and we had seven, I think, Jeff, in the end, 7 US government speakers, including Karen, a few other people in the room, and that also enabled us to have a bilateral between the Australian government and the US government, and that's what this photo is here with A lot of the US representatives, many of whom you would know, obviously, and in amongst there, in terms of Australia, quite a few of the Geoscience Australia people involved in Southpan, but for example, Eloise Clare from our Department of Home Affairs, who's in charge of looking at PNT vulnerability, and I've been working with her a bit, helping it where I can. Two different parts of Australian Defence were there, Bureau of Meteorology, Air Services, so it was a good meeting. And I think it was a good agenda as well. So I just wanted to highlight that that level of cooperation is going on between Australia and the US, which is of course very welcome. So next slide, please. So on to Southpan. These slides are actually very similar to what was in Houston. Like I say, there wasn't that much time, but they are actually from Vincent Rook's presentation at IGNSS, so it's a most recent set of slides available. Next slide, please. This is the same slide as you would have seen many times, but just to reiterate this idea of having three different services, the sort of L1 SBAS, GPS L1, legacy SBAS, if you like, next generation SBAS, GPS Galileo L1, L5 process, and then the PVS, which is an embedded acronym for PPP via Southpan, and it's currently being delivered on the L5 signal within part of the message for the SBAS, but as you'll see later, as they get the new payload, that will move to an L5B, equivalent of E5B, which will give better bandwidth for better accuracy. Next slide, please. Some of the infrastructures coming up out of the ground, so the Uralla station in New South Wales, the uplink station is the one on the right there, I believe, and the one in the middle is the new station being developed in New Zealand as an uplink station. And there's also been a bit of progress on development of the correction processing facilities. Next slide, please. This is the different current open services as a review. Again, I won't go into it in detail due to time, but the message on this slide is that the actuals in every case are performing better than the targets, which is, of course, good to see in the initial open services. Next slide, please. And this is the overall timeline. So that point I mentioned, for example, in terms of the high accuracy, the PPP service is once the first new payload for GEO is available, because it's currently using the testbed GEO, once the actual newly procured GEO comes online, that will raise levels of availability and confidence, but also, for example, introduce that E5B type signal to send a more bandwidth and therefore better performing PPP service. And then, of course, the long and hard process to get certification through to full operational capability around late 2028. Next, please. So yeah, just future developments. The first satellite payload, the new satellite payload, is going through CDR in mid-24. And then I believe the procurement that started for the second payload, but when the contract will be awarded is still to be developed. Next, please. Yeah, this is just around the internet services. It says delivery coming soon, but as Frank knows, there is a prototype already running and it's starting to be used and tested by people. A few other things there. There's a lot of work also going on in the user space on use cases and various building the business case for the next continuing business case for the continuing expenditure. So thanks. Next slide. And then that's just contacts and websites in both Australia and New Zealand. Next, please. I need some water. of slides to finish off. This is a slide that I presented in Houston on Quantex doing their optical clock. And at the time, Brad asked about the quality of the clock, which I couldn't answer at the time. But next slide, please. This is the answer. I've since been looking into this a lot more, and one of the features of this, there was a really good talk at IGNSS by Quantex. They're developing this clock using, wherever they can, optical components from the telecommunications industry. So they're not building this bespoke optical clock, they're building a producible optical clock, which is an interesting way to do it. And so anyway, that's the answer. Brad, 3 by 10 to the minus 15 at 10 to the 5th seconds, I think.
Yeah, candidly, I was not asking about the target. I was asking about what they actually had as test data. And to the degree you can get that to us,
that's their target. That was their answer.
Yeah,
that's the answer from them. So,
yeah. It's a great target. Wonderful. But the question is, what are they actually experiencing with their prototypes? Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
So, the point is they're still only just building testing the engineering model now. So what they will get, we should know within the next 6 months or so, I guess. So next slide, final slide. You may have heard of a company called Gilmore Space. They're on the Gold Coast, south of Brisbane, where I live. And they've just stood up at a launch site towards the northern part of Queensland, where I'm from. What will be the first locally made orbital launch, and it's expected to launch within the next month or so. So that will be a very historic thing for Australia, of course. But next click, please. You may have seen in GPS World that the Australian Space Agency, we've just given a grant to Gilmore Space and the University of New South Wales, Andrew Dempster's team at the University of New South Wales, for those who know Andrew through IGNSS, etc., to take the GNSS receiver, the space-qualified GNSS receiver developed at UNSW, and integrate it into the Gilmore Space rocket. So that's one of our most recent grants and worth mentioning, I think. And I'll stop there. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you very much, Matt. And let's move on. Croatia, Renato, Dr. Renato.
Thank you, Chair, for giving me the floor. And before I start my presentation, I would like to congratulate you all and the previous members of the advisory board. It is 30th meeting, very worth noticing that there is a practice in GPS that allows us to express our ideas, express our proposal publicly, which says something about transparency and also about the standard of the GPS, gold or whatever color we would like to present it. In my short presentation, I will try to entertain you with some, should I say, findings and effects that I would like to highlight here as a potential subjects of future discussions or perhaps activities related to it. May I have a next slide, please? I was addressing this board a couple of times with the idea of the ambient adaptive application aligned PNT. We have discussed it in previous meetings as well, and I would like to emphasize that the concept is gaining interest among the other research groups and even operational deployments and implementations. Our research group, the research group to which I belonged, has developed the so far closed framework for the A squared PNT that serves as an opportunity to test various concepts, test various models, and also to introduce a very important technology of artificial intelligence in assessing the positioning environment, situation awareness, and also allowing for the autonomous adaptation to the environment as well as to the requests and requirements of the GPS and GNSS applications. This is important because the applications increasingly have an impact on the PNT process and should be, in our opinion, be given an opportunity to define this process or to actively be involved in it. So the next slide, please. Not the previous, but the next, if we may. So in AA square, PNT, artificial intelligence and machine learning have also a very important role. Their utilization may bring some novelty, may bring some advancement, and may be beneficial in targeting complex phenomena that can degrade PNT performance. So in that case, I would like to propose the discussion on the assessment of the technology, business, regulatory, and legal consequences of vulnerabilities and benefits that results from the implementation of the artificial intelligence and machine learning. You have already heard that for the next fall meeting, there will be a white paper prepared that will address the AI utilization for the PNT. And I believe that we will have an opportunity to discuss this white paper that is developed under the Frank van Diegelen's subcommittee. He already reported this initiative and opportunity to address the AI deployment for the PNT. So the next slide, please. We have also discussed a lot about the threats of spoofing and jamming. I would like to emphasize the couple of news I have gathered since the last meeting, especially the interest of other operators and the other, should I say, stakeholders in the GNSS and GPS implementation and deployment in setting up the facilities in which, in controlled way, GNSS spoofing and GNSS jamming can be produced in order to developers, in order to operators of the GPS and GNSS applications to test their systems and services and to see if they are robust enough and reliable enough, even in case of GNSS spoofing and jamming threats. I'm showing you the photos of two of them. The upper one is the setup made at a joint research center of the European Union in the city of Ispra in Italy. And the lower one is presented during the UN Finland workshop on GNSS applications last year in Helsinki. It was a Sintev's facility in Norway, a bay dedicated completely to the exposure of the GNSS applications to the controlled GNSS spoofing and jamming threats, allowing industry, academia, military to test their systems and services under those threats. My proposal for actions and considerations would be to facilitate the recommendation to set up a permanent US national controlled test facility for industry and business that would allow the testing of different detection techniques, of course, and counter techniques that can be mitigate effects of the GPS spoofing and jamming. The next slide, please. We are talking also about the GPS as a gold standard, and it just struck me, GPS is a gold standard in another way. Many in the world, not only here in the US, including me, use the GPS as the initial case for the teaching young specialists the PNT. PNT has become a very important subject taught at many universities in many disciplines, and the majority of us who educate young specialists start with the GPS as a blueprint and then move forward explaining the additional features provided by other GNSS systems. Why is that? GPS is transparent documentation is transparent. It is logically structured, and it is easy to understand how satellite navigation works if you consider it with the GPS. I proposed the action in a sense of discussion on the recommendation for establishment a multidisciplinary national and international GPS-based PNT master doctoral study framework that would even fortify this role of GPS in education, so setting it as a gold education standard. So the next slide, please. Finally, I would like to remind you that I have already sent to the group the information about the release of the latest USPA Market 2024 report. The the European Agency for the Space Program regularly issue the market 2024, 2025, etc. reports on the GNSS applications and developments from the technology and business perspectives. Those reports are also very well structured to identify the trends and future developments of the application of GNSS, as well as the needs of the GNSS applications for the PNT performance. I would propose the action for some of the future meetings of this PNT-AB to consider issuing the recommendation for facilitation of the national survey of GPS application needs and requirements across disciplines. This will help the adoption of the GPS as a gold standard, but also it will provide the strategists and also investors an opportunity to invest their money into development of the GPS as infrastructure, but also additional features and the GNSS applications. And the next slide, please. This will be the last one. There are many events in the world addressing the PNT. I would like to stress out that in Croatia, on Krk Island, in Baška, from 16th to 18th June 2024, there will be another meeting of the Baška Spatial Information Fusion Forum. We have heard a lot about fusion of different sensor observation in order to fortify and advance the PNT. There will be many international experts speaking at the Baška SIF Forum, and I'm delighted to reveal that even several members of this group plan to attend this meeting. So this is the invitation for the rest. If you're interested, if you have an opportunity, do come, do enjoy a lovely scenery of the Croatian Adriatic, and also be engaged in the discussion of the recent development of the PNT, remote sensing, but also statistical analysis, statistical learning on the spatial data, and development of completely new market and new discipline. And with this, I would like to thank you for your attention while staying and remaining, as always, open for your question and comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Renato. Yeah, that looks like a good opportunity for somebody. Any questions that people have? Hearing none, thank you very much. Oh, Tim.
I just have a comment on one of your slides. You recommended the U.S. set up a permanent facility for jamming and spoofing trials, and we sort of have one already in the form of White Sands. And there's but if you're suggesting it should be something that's geared strictly towards commercial or civilian use, then yeah, I would agree with you. It would be nice to have one that we didn't have to worry about ITAR and security concerns and things.
Yes, I believe it would be useful that this permanent facility would be open, of course, on the basis of some sort of a subscription to allow the wide range of potential operators of the applications have an opportunity to really test what they can offer.
Yeah, so if we had something like that in Montana, do you think a lot of European manufacturers would fly all the way over here to use it, or
That's it. It would be also a good idea to promote it because apparently people are probably not entirely aware of the opportunity to use it. But in any way, thank you very much for the comments.
Okay, let's move ahead then. And Professor Terry Moore of the United Kingdom.
Good morning, everybody. Hopefully the slides will come up soon. Hopefully you have some slides. Obviously last December was a great celebration for me because I actually had something to say for the first time. So hopefully I'll build on that a little bit today with a limited amount further to say. So the usual sort of update, let's start with what's happening officially in the UK first of all. So for the next slide, please. So I started with this overview slide from the UK government last time when I started the presentation, which tries to put it all on one slide as a takeaway, explaining what PNT is, why there's a risk, and how the government is going to respond to this. And just to remind you, this was all published in October last year. The important bit is the circle down the bottom right there, where it says this is what the UK framework will be, and the next couple of slides just highlighted that. And these are just repeats of what I showed you last time we met. So the next slide, please. So setting out these 10 points of the action framework, setting up the PNT office, well, that has now happened, of course. There are now, the number of staffing is increasing all the time, but there are now the order of 10 permanent staff working in the PNT office within the Department of Science, Innovation and Technology. And they are leading the ongoing activities now to develop the program, to develop the business models, and to take the work further forward. One of the key first parts of that is this action plan or crisis plan to how UK will respond to interruptions to PNT services. The National Timing Centre is a key part of this. The majority of the aspects of critical national infrastructure, the resilience aspects there depending on PNT, are dependent upon the T and not the P and the N. And so the National Timing Centre is a key aspect of this to provide this stable and distributed UK version of UTC. A backup to that from a military point of view, known as nominally as MOD time, will shadow the activity within the public domain at MPL to provide an MOT framework for timing distribution as well. And then dissemination of that and for PNT activities generally through the redevelopment of the ELARAN. So the one existing station obviously is continuing, which is broadcasting ELARAN signals for timing, but that will be expanded or planned to be expanded to give a positioning capability in addition to the timing. Next slide, please. Addressing many of the aspects we were talking about yesterday as well in terms of producing more robust and longer resilient receivers, holdover clocks, and other aspects from a user's point of view. Developing the UK SBAS capability, this has been something that has been in a prototype form now for a few years, following the cessation of use of EGNOS by the United Kingdom, following some political decision that was taken a few years ago. That is continuing that activity and will be expanded to give a PPP service in addition to the traditional SBAS services for aviation. The skills gap we talked about yesterday as well is being addressed in the UK through the establishment of new doctoral training centres and other forms of training as part of the plan. The growth policy is quite interesting. I'll come back to this in a few moments' time, a little bit later. Out of the growth policy, I'd pick up particularly this part about standards and testing, again, overlapping some of the discussion that was taking place yesterday and what's happening with that in the UK next. And then the next generation, previous slide. And then the next generation of technology taking PNT further forward in terms of a potential satellite system, in terms of the quantum aspects. I guess a bit of news on the UK quantum navigator aspect there. There was a call recently after last year's series of research calls in quantum PNT, there was a call earlier this year for a quantum PNT hub to really drive forward and steer the research activity around the country on quantum PNT. That is my understanding. That has now been awarded, but it's not been publicly announced yet. So we'll see soon see an announcement of that. The next slide, please. Tries to then express what's been on the last couple of slides in terms of this system of systems method here. So obviously managed by the PNT office there. The timing center is the core of this, feeding into the time distribution, the PPP and augmentation services through the SBAS, the distribution of that time through optical fibers, ELA-RAN down the bottom there. Right down the bottom, the Ordnance Survey Network, Ordnance Survey being the national mapping organization in the United Kingdom, in Great Britain actually technically, has a network of over 100 continuously operating GNSS receivers, which are multi-constellation, I should add, and multi-frequency. They do an awful lot of monitoring work as well as the normal geodetic activity in terms of the quality of the signals and interference monitoring, and that feeds in terms of the ELA-RAN and into the UK Space Operations Centre. This is, again, a fairly recent development from UK Space Command, now has the Space Operations Centre, which is MOD and the Space Agency and the Meteorological Office working together. And then the paler blue box, I guess, is the user aspects of this, so developing those more robust, resilient GNSS chips, the clocks, and the ELA-RAN receivers, and I apologize, it says aerials, it should say antennas, it's not my slide, you can probably guess. And then feeding into, obviously, this work covering GPS and Galileo. Next slide, please. So where is that at the moment? Well, it's going to be phased. The first phase is the developing of the plans and proposals for the National Timing Centre as the priority, as I said, the expansion of the UK SBAS from the prototype to an operational system, and the ELA-RAN network. What will that mean? As I said, it's expansion potentially from the single station to multiple stations. And at a later phase of the developments, the regional satellite system of some form, the quantum PNT aspects, and building on some of the commercial LEO PNT activities that are taking place. A lot of international discussions are taking place. I've just listed a number of countries here. They're in no particular order, but USA is the first of the list. USA, Japan, Korea, obviously Europe itself, Canada through the European Space Agency partnership, Australia and New Zealand with SouthPan and other activities as well. But a key point of this, a key point of the program is the office has been established and it is developing the plans now and the business models. They will have to go before comprehensive spending review for any funding to be awarded to this. So although I'm talking about all these plans, it's all awaiting that development of the business models, the business plans, and then the funding of those to actually get into these developments I've been talking about. Next slide, please. Through the European Space Agency, in particular the Navigation, Innovation and Support Programme within NAVIS, ESA is a strong supporter, the UK is a strong supporter of ESA, and particularly through the NAVIS programme. And so a lot of the work to support the framework that I've been talking about is taking place under this framework within the European Space Agency. And so I only show a few examples on here to show the sort of work, but things like the optical clocks, the antennas for the ELA-RAN, the UK SBAS testbed has all been funded through NAVIS, and various other ones. They're just for illustration along here. A number of projects are taking place. Next slide, please. I thought I'd also mention this as well, because I haven't mentioned this previously. This is fairly new activity as well. The National Space Strategy was published in 2021, and a partnership has now been formed, funded by government and industry and supported by academia, to try and make sure that space policy is actually actioned. And so the Space Partnership is the body that's doing that. The diagram here really just shows the governance of that with representations from academia and industry and government. But the one thing they are primarily doing is producing a series of roadmaps across the different aspects. This is all space, it's not just PNT, but PNT is one of those lines in there for the roadmaps that are being developed. It's also looking at the skills aspect of it as well, again across the whole of the space sector, and trying to prioritize that engagement with the European Space Agency in terms of the priorities for UK involvement in projects and funding. Next slide, please. I've also mentioned several times the activities that are taking place in the Royal Institute of Navigation. There is no equivalent at the moment of this sort of board to advise the PNT office. And quite as an independent activity, the RAN took it on itself to try and provide that independent guidance and advice as the PNT office is forming. And I've reported on this previously. Just some recent events that have taken place. The LEO PNT event was March last year. I think I mentioned this last time. Two key publications have been the white paper on best practice. This is looking at standards and testings and best practice to provide resilient PNT. I'll continue with that in a few moments' time. That also fed into the National Preparedness Committee presentation. We have had now two leadership seminars, that we've called them, so an annual event around the November-December timeframe. The second one took place, and that's led on to a lot of new activity, which I'll talk about on the next slide. Engagement with the defense sector through MO. Oh, sorry. No, sorry. I did say next slide, didn't I? That was my mistake. Also with the defense sector, we held one event last July, and another one is planned for June, which will be a two-day event, hopefully, this year, where we will have one day in the public domain and one day in a more secure environment, rather like the IONS JNC conference, where we can actually discuss PNT activities at that crossover between the civil and defense sectors. Two areas that are of consideration here as well are the artificial intelligence and the quantum PNT activity. We've now set up a special working group on the PNT and AI group that was within the PNT advisory group as a subcommittee, and that will be moving forwards. And a quantum PNT activity and review is expected to be taking place in September. And of course, throughout this, we are providing that support to the PNT office. Next slide, please. So one of those in particular came out of the white paper, which I mentioned last time. This is this effort to bring together and talk about best practice and best principles for resilient PNT. The PNT office has now approached the RAN and asked them to develop that work further, looking particularly at the principles and the best practices and guidance that could be given. And this follows on from the events that we held last year in the paper that was published, of course. And we'll look at providing that farm guidance, looking at different sectors, different domains, trying to provide guidance as to how people should manage their own applications and uses of PNT to provide that resilience and robustness. And that should be delivering by the autumn, or sorry, by the fall. Next slide, please. So I've showed this timeline many times now. It continuously develops in terms of the events and the activities that are taking place. I've already spoken about most of those. I guess one I haven't mentioned, it's probably very small and you probably can't read it, and the blue line next to the bottom there is one idea we're starting to look at is the role of PNT when we're looking at space debris and how that is managed in the future. So a potential future event there looking at space debris as part of our activities. And continuing this work as it's evolving across AI and quantum and the leadership aspects. Some of the work we've been doing, we expect to continue, but some of it is waiting funding as well. For example, things like the economic impact paper done with London Economics, that's had a second revision. We are hoping to take that forward and to keep it rolling as an activity, but it requires funding to do that. My final slide will follow on from Renato's example. So next slide, please. And it's to advertise a conference, of course. So the European Navigation Conference is taking place in about a month's time in Noordwijk in the Netherlands at the European Space Agency's test center, ESTEC. It's been organized, obviously, under the banner of EUGIN, the European Group of Institutes of Navigation, of which I'm the chair. The Royal Institute of Navigation has taken the lead in the organization this time. And this sets a new model that we're hoping to take forward with the European Navigation Conferences. We've tried to give it a whole new life and regeneration. And so the RAN is organizing it on behalf of EUGIN, but it's taking place in another country. It's taking place in the Netherlands, just to show the model that we can be flexible in the future. Last year, the conference was a huge success. This year, we're already oversubscribed with attendees, which is excellent news. So why am I telling you about it? Because we have a way of inviting people to still attend. So although we've met our target of attendees, we still have capacity to take some more registrations. So if you are planning to attend, please have a look. The website URL is at the top there. And so please consider coming to the European Navigation Conference in about a month's time. Thank you.
Very good report. Thanks for that. Are there any questions, comments? Very thorough. Let me ask one. Maybe I missed it, but is there a formal relationship now between you and the European version of GPS? Is the UK...
So maybe, I think I understand what you're saying. So just a point of clarification. When the UK left Europe, it left the European Commission, it left the European Union. It didn't leave the European Space Agency. The European Space Agency is a completely independent organization, separate from the political alliance of the European Union. The UK has remained a very strong supporter and very strong funder to the European Space Agency and supports, therefore, the development of activities in PNT within ESA. Because aspects of Galileo are being developed, in terms of Galileo second generation, are being developed by ESA, the UK is not allowed to take part in those programs because we're no longer part of the European Union, but most of ESA's activities, which includes, for example, the LEO PNT activities that are taking place, and Genesis, some of you may have heard of Genesis, which is a demonstration, rather like NTS-3 program to test new capabilities for PNT in space. The UK is a major contributor to those and a partner in those.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we're up to David, Consumer Technology Association. Mr. David Grossman, yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Parkinson. Good morning, everyone. For those in the audience and who are streaming online, if you're not familiar with the Consumer Technology Association, we're a US-based trade association representing over 1,300 companies, from household names that you would know, but also 80% of our members are small businesses. We are also known for owning and producing CES, formerly known as the Consumer Electronics Show, which takes place in Las Vegas every year. I do have slides, but before I go to my prepared remarks, I did want to make some comments about the multi-GNSS conversation, because the companies I represent operate in a global marketplace. The chipsets and finished devices that they produce are developed to reach markets around the globe. So I do think, and I have some great concern when I hear references being made between Beidou as a receive-only service and making a comparison akin to Huawei and TikTok. I just don't think that that's productive, nor is that consistent with the information that I've heard. And if there is information out there and it needs to be discussed in a classified setting, you know, our member companies would appreciate hearing that information. I think otherwise, some of the discussion I've heard threatens to balkanize the global GNSS marketplace. So with that, go to the next slide. I wanted to touch on 4 topics today. You may be thinking, what do these 4 issues have to do with this advisory board? And I would counter that by saying that they are very relevant, because we can't operate in a bubble. You know, we're here talking about GPS issues, but I think it's also important to understand what are the issues policymakers in Washington are talking about, and what are the regulatory agencies that we work with, what are the other issues that are before them. So I'm going to touch on 4 issues in my brief period of time. Next slide. So first, touching on the National Spectrum Strategy that was announced at the White House, released by NTIA in November of this past year. And then just last month, on March 12th, NTIA released its implementation plan for the National Spectrum Strategy. The idea, for those who haven't been following this strategy, the idea is to provide a public roadmap, and this is in the words of NTIA, for each strategic objective, identifying specific outcomes, responsible federal agencies, contributing stakeholders, and a timeline for both the beginning and the expected completion of that effort. I will note that in the original strategy released in November, there is mention of GPS and GNSS, recognizing the important role they play for our nation, as well as the need to protect them from harmful interference. In terms of what some of the spectrum bands that have been identified in that report, none of them are anywhere near GPS spectrum, but I will highlight they're looking at the lower 3 gigahertz, 7 to 8 gigahertz band, 18 gigahertz, and the lower 37. And as part of this implementation plan, there are various deadlines that are set for when studies are going to be completed for each of those bands. I'll also note, all the while this discussion is happening, the FCC Spectrum Auction Authority has not been renewed in over a year. It expired in March of 2023, and more than a year later, Congress is still trying to wrestle with that conversation. Our organization has talked about what that means for U.S. leadership, particularly on the global stage. There are continuing conversations in Congress, and we do hope that those get resolved soon, and we do see Spectrum Auction Authority renewed. So let me go to the next slide. So this is another effort that we are really excited about. It's being led by the Federal Communications Commission. It was and continues to be a priority of this administration. It's called the U.S. Cyber Trust Mark. This is the mark that the FCC has developed. The idea is a voluntary program, so everyone in this room is familiar with the Energy Star program. You know, when you look for products in store shelves or when you're online, you look for that Energy Star label, and you know that it meets various energy efficiency standards. The idea here is to take that same concept to the cybersecurity world for connected IoT devices. So the scope of what we're talking about, it's everything from smart appliances to video doorbells and baby monitors. So I don't, at this point, expect, because largely the devices that are in scope are stationary, there's probably not a direct GPS, GNSS connection, but we do think it's something, given that the cybersecurity conversation is very relevant, it's something for this group to be aware of. It is based on a NIST standard and recommendations, NIST 8425. There's also a focus on international harmonization and mutual recognition, including an agreement that was announced with the European Union at the end of January. Very importantly, the approach that the United States taking here is different than the EU, which is in the EU a mandatory. Here is a voluntary approach, and that's something that gives our industry and companies comfort. We also think if this is the first time that you're hearing about this effort, we've got a lot more work to do, particularly on the consumer education front. That's something we'll be working with the FCC, the administration, as well as CISA to make sure we get the word out, because what good is a label or a mark on a product on a website or store shelves if a consumer doesn't know what it means or what to look for. And I'll say, without naming any specific company names, there is a lot of excitement in industry from big name companies, both retailers and manufacturers. We're looking forward to the next steps on this from the FCC so that they can start testing products and implementing. I'll go to the next slide, please. I want to touch on federal privacy legislation. This is by no means a new topic. Congress has been debating the efforts to have a national privacy law for at least a decade or more, and all the while we're seeing a patchwork of state privacy laws pop up. The focus on this bill, and there was, as I note here, just this month, in a matter of the last 2 weeks, a bipartisan, bicameral effort led in the Senate by Senator Cantwell, who's the chair of the Senate Commerce Committee, and in the House by Congresswoman Kathy McMorris Rodgers, who's the Republican and chair of the House Energy and Commerce Committee. So the fact that it's bipartisan, bicameral, I think that it needs warrants the attention of this group. Even in an election year, it is seeing momentum. The bill focuses on a few different areas: data minimization, transparency, and giving individuals the right to opt out of covered data transfers and opting out of targeted advertising. How does this relate to this group? No surprise that precise geolocation information is defined in the bill, not only as under the definition of sensitive covered data, but as well a separate definition for precise geolocation information, which comes down to identifying street-level location information or the location of an individual device within a range of 1,850 feet or less. I will note as well, in terms of where CTA stands on it, we want to see a bill that provides a full preemption of state law. We do have some concerns about the current bill as it's been introduced. And similarly, CTA opposes a private right of action, which is currently in the draft bill. It is getting a lot of attention. There was a legislative hearing held in the House last week, and a Senate hearing is likely to take place in a matter of the next couple weeks. We'll go to the next slide. So I want to touch on a final issue here, which I suspect may not be on the attention to the attention of many of you. It's something that we are very concerned about. There is a bill moving through Congress that would require the Department of Transportation to issue a rule that requires all new motor vehicles to have devices that can access AM broadcast stations installed as standard equipment. I would liken that in a GPS context, if this group were to go to Congress and say that all new vehicles have to have a GPS receiver built in every new vehicle. We all know in the GPS world, consumers have smartphones. They have a number of different ways. They can also buy portable navigation units. There are a number of different ways they can access GPS information. And the same in the context of AM radio. If the concern is about emergency information, we have wireless emergency alerts that are provided through our cell phones. There is also satellite radio, as well as a number of AM and FM stations are broadcast, are streamed through online platforms. As I said, CTA is very concerned about this effort. You might think in a polarized and divided Congress, this can't be very high up on the list, but it actually is moving at a rapid pace with a large number of co-sponsors in both the House and Senate. There will be a legislative hearing next week in the House Energy and Commerce Committee. And just some context here, because again, I'm trying to connect everything to this group here. What's happening in the marketplace is as more electric vehicles are sold, there's an interference issue between electric vehicles and AM radio stations at, of course, very low frequency. And so some automakers have already removed AM radios from their vehicles, and that has been what's prompted the introduction of this legislation. Our view, let market forces. If consumers want to choose a vehicle that has AM radio, there are many choices for that, but we believe that should be left to the consumer and to the market. I think that I also, no, I'll leave it at that. That was my last slide. Happy to take any questions.
All right, Tom first and then Frank, please.
Just curious about the AM and the EV. So is it that the operation of an EV interferes with the reception of AM radio? Is that the issue?
That's correct, and vice versa. And so, the counter argument to that is, well, couldn't you just add more shielding in the vehicle? Well, for those who have electric vehicles or familiar with the industry, you know that every little bit of weight on the vehicle makes a difference in terms of performance.
Go ahead, Frank.
We're trying to work out what kind of number is 1,850 feet, and we can't figure it out. 0.3 of a mile, it doesn't seem like a good round number.
Yeah, I actually do not know. I wanted to point that out because I thought it would be interesting, this group. I actually don't know the origin of how that specific number came to be, but I'd be happy to dig into it and see how they came to it.
It isn't pi over 3 or something? All right. Thank you very much, David.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see your hand. Jeff?
You're so quick. David, the U.S. Cyber Trust Mark program, can you unpack a little bit of that? Not to take a lot of time, but I mean, how would that work? Because we know the bad actors are pretty clever about getting around just about any protection we are capable of devising.
Yeah.
Is it just, I mean, what kind of assurance are you going to get? And maybe Frank can tell us whether Pixel phones are going to be part of the Cyber Trust Mark program. I love the concept. I just wonder if it's really workable.
Yeah. Well, I'll say first off, and those in the cybersecurity world know that no company can ever make a claim that a device will be 100% impenetrable. But there is a set list of criteria, everything from, example, use of default passwords, for example. Think about best practices in the world of cybersecurity, and that's what the mark represents. And I should also say, in terms of where it is, there's already been a notice of proposed rulemaking. There's already been a report and order adopted by the FCC just last month. And notably, it was a 5-0 vote, which we don't always see in this current environment.
Quick follow-up, if I may, on the American Privacy Rights Act.
Yeah.
Is that going to be a U.S. version of the GDPR in Europe? Is it comparable to that? I mean, I ask that question because having been working in Europe for so long, my assessment of the GDPR is that it is a huge nuisance and producing relatively little actual public interest value. I just hope we're not replicating that. Every time I go on a website, I have to go to a check mark to say, yes, you can use, I don't mind the cookies, and it's just like, it's not adding any value to anything and wastes a huge amount of time.
There's obviously a lot to unpack in that. I'd be happy to discuss after, but I would say that as a general matter, it does take a very different approach. And I think the bill sponsors would make that argument if you ask them that they are not trying to replicate GDPR. They're trying to create a model that fits with the way we look at regulation and policy here in the United States.
Okay, thank you very much. Everything's cool? Okay. Resilient Navigation and Timing Foundation representative, Mr. Dana Goward.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, everybody. And I've got a couple quick issues for you. The R&T Foundation, we are a scientific and educational charity, and we advocate for policies and systems to protect GPS satellites, signals, and users. So we're very happy to be a part of this board and have the opportunity to participate. So as I say, a couple things. The first is late breaking to me anyway, just this morning. I will remind you that almost exactly 4 years ago, the FCC ruled that Legato networks could broadcast on the frequency right near GPS. And I hate to rip that Band-Aid off today, but there is a little bit of an update. You may remember that Quickly after that ruling, the R&T Foundation filed a petition for reconsideration with the FCC saying, please, we think you did the wrong thing. Let's think about this again. So did 7 other organizations or group of organizations. So we had all of these petitions hanging out there unanswered for the last 4 years. In that time, Legato has been saying, we have a final FCC decision. So very, very recently, the court has ruled that the FCC order is non-final for purposes of judicial review. So if you are ever in conversations about that, or you hear Legato say that they have a final FCC order, you can offer that in response, that there are all of these petitions for reconsideration out there, and that the court has ruled that the FCC order is non-final for purposes of judicial review. So, okay, that's the first thing. So the second thing is that we've been talking about working with the government and a lot of the undercurrents, and some people have said quite overtly that it's really hard to work with government. It's true. I can tell you, having been on the inside for 40 years, it's in many ways a lot harder to work inside of government, if you will. Yes, there's, folks have a lot, and Sarah, if you'd call up the slides, folks have a lot more information, but at the same time, they have to be a lot more circumspect as to what they can say and what they can opine on, as you would imagine any large organization. So we've been talking about the need for a whole of government effort, and I will remind you, and I think this is an encouraging thing, that we have had whole of government efforts and approaches to PNT before, as you can see right here. And while this is still out there and may not have been executed, clearly was not executed the way that most all of us in the room would have been liked and have been carried on with, there are other ongoing whole of government efforts similar to what we want to see, and so that should give us some optimism in terms of the ability to influence leadership to do similar things, again, for us going forward. Next slide, if you would. There we go. One of those, a good current example of that, is the National Cybersecurity Strategy and Implementation Plan. And I think an interesting thing about this that we should all note is that one of the, in fact, probably the big assumption going into the national cybersecurity approach is that end users bear too much burden for mitigating the risks to themselves and the nation, and that in many instances end users are not as capable of doing things, and that government and big providers should bear more of the responsibility. And I would offer to you that this can be a good template, right? And there are so many, we've talked before about PNT being a cyber issue. And so this kind of thing can be a really good template for, next slide if you would, perhaps a national PNT strategy going forward. And really, if you want to be conserve your effort as a government official, and I always did, you know, there's a lot of just pirating you can do and using the same kind of language, and it continues to make a whole lot of sense in terms of national policy. Continue on, if you will. In fact, this is the implementation plan, the pillars from the fact sheet for the implementation. Look at the different pillars and lines of effort that they're talking about. Incredibly directly applicable to the kinds of things that we want to see in PNT. And, you know, as again, if PNT is a subset of cyber, maybe it's already in there. I don't know. PNT isn't specifically mentioned. But it gives me hope that the government is beginning to think about these kinds of things going forward. And again, next one. I've been a little bit cute here and done my editing again, and you can see that it wouldn't take much to apply these same kind of things and make them entirely applicable to a PNT timing strategy, a security strategy implementation plan. So just so you don't get too down in the dumps thinking, oh my God, government is a monolith, it's hard to work with, never changes. That's not the case. I think we have all reason to be optimistic. So that's the second thing. Third thing is I just want to call everyone's attention again to our, next slide, our website. We revamped the homepage just a little bit, and Sarah's going to actually link to our website. A couple things that could be of interest and use to you all. Over on the left, we have had our long-standing GPS cafe that is a great tool, I think, in terms of being able to talk to people about how GPS is used in many facets of life. In fact, I've given presentations just using this one image without even the pop-ups. So it's a little bit of an applet, and as you mouse over it, you can see how GPS impacts maritime there. You've got agriculture down to the road, up to the aviation. There you go, up to the moon and the sky, so forth. Well, you get the idea. There's hardly any place you can put your mouse there where something doesn't pop up and link to a reference on how GPS is supportive or is important to this particular capability. So that's kind of a fun thing. Hopefully you all will be able to use it in our efforts. And if, in fact, the advisory board gets its own website, we're happy to have this ported over, improved and used. We're happy to contribute that and share. So the next thing is in the middle there, you can see is gpsjam.org. You can link to that. This is a great website. Hopefully you've all been there. You can see what yesterday's interference looks like as reported by ADSB. Interesting thing is that it's not just all about Europe and the Middle East. You can see in Kashmir and Myanmar, there's interference probably associated with armed conflict in those particular areas. But again, remember, it's all linked to ADSB, and as we go over to the U.S., we can see, oh, there is some interference there. Well, it's not interference. Todd and his folks have, at Stanford, have investigated that, and it's not really interference. That's Air Force flight training. When they do aerobatics, they go into unusual configurations, and so the GPS receiver loses the signal, and it reports a low navigation integrity message. So, as with all of these things, we need to know what the underlying assumptions are and be skeptical and ask more questions in terms of these high-level presentations. So a fun and informative and interesting website. Good first level, right, warning and indicator of where we should look and where we should ask questions about. And then finally, the last bit, well, not all the last bit, this is a brand new one. This is by the Zurich University of Applied Sciences. This is a real-time depiction of where spoofing is going on in the world. You can see there's a lot of spoofing going on. Has a lot of interesting features. You can narrow down to one particular aircraft that's being spoofed. And this is a little tricky. You have to click on that dot. Just click on it again, and it will take you to Flight Radar 24, and will show you the airplane. And tell you more about the airplane that is represented in that particular dot. And the way they do this, by the way, and it pops up and explains when you go to the site, is they determine airplanes that are in the same place at the same time, and they try to, if you can go back to the tool, they try to, but they're not always successful in showing where the airplanes have been spoofed from and where the airplanes have been spoofed to. Again, not necessarily a national intelligence tool, but it's great open source indicator of where things are happening and what's happening in the world. And then back to our website, if you would. And the very last thing I want to point out, well, no, that's the next to last thing. We also provide visibility for the advisory board recommendations there, some of those, and then our recommendations we've made independent of the advisory board. We invite you to join, of course. We're happy to do that. And we post some periodically recent news items along with our comments on that. I don't know how many of you have seen this most recent one, but it's an interesting report by NASA of a transatlantic captain who had one of his two GPS receivers jammed. He was convinced that it had not had jammed, it had failed. And he was also convinced that he couldn't fly across the Atlantic, despite dispatch arguing with him that, no, your GPS receiver's failed. It's going to come back as soon as you exit the area. And two, even if you don't have GPS, you're perfectly safe to fly the Atlantic. We got your back. But no, he didn't want to do that, and so he returned to base. Really, really interesting. Our point in the blog post there is it's all about the human element, right? It's not just about systems. Systems support people, and human element is oftentimes the most important in a good and in a bad way. So that is my update for today. I have to take any questions.
Very, very interesting and kind of fun, actually. That particular chart for all charts that you can click on. Very impressive. Dana.
Thank you.
Wow. Okay, any comments? I always look.
Just a quick observation, when you showed that spoofing, that was just over the last 4 hours. I noticed the slider on that.
Yeah, so click on that again. Yeah, and then close that up. So there's a slider over there. You can go down to the left, actually, go down to the left, and you can see what's happened in the last minute. It's updated every 10 minutes. Again, I'm not endorsing or saying, but this is, many of you know Okawari from DLR, who's moved over to Zurich University, and he's the one that helped develop this and make it available. So, really interesting.
Comment, Renato?
Thank you, Chair. Just an updated Flight Radar 24 also introduced the GPS jamming maps similar to the previous one, so it would be worth to see what methodologies are used.
Yeah. No, I didn't know that. I've got Flight Radar on 24.
Yeah, why don't you get together and see if you can sample that deal. Okay, without any more comments, we're delighted to have the Honorable Jeff Shane, who represents the IATA, and comes to us all the way from Switzerland.
Good morning to everybody in the room and to the millions watching online. Do we have my slides? I'm happy to note that I am the last briefing you will have to endure during the course of this meeting. I'm also going to note that this is the only briefing you will have seen representing users of the system. We're not providers, we're not manufacturers, we're not a state, we're not an association. We are actually representing people that depend on PNT. Could I have the first slide, please? I thought maybe a little background on IATA might be helpful, not long. It's a storied organization. It was set up in 1945 at the time when we were creating the basic structure of international aviation after the Second World War. ICAO, the UN agency that's responsible for aviation, was created in 1944, established in 45. It sets standards at the state level, at the government level, whereas IATA was set up to set standards for commercial aviation, to create global consistency within the industry. So, and it still does that. So when you have a barcode on your suitcase that gets your suitcase from beginning to end your trip, that's an IATA standard. There are a whole host of standards. IATA is sort of the glue that holds the global aviation system together even to this day. It's also it's a trade association. It has 320 members, actually, airlines from around the world. That's actually only a relatively small fraction of the number of airlines in the world, but those airlines represent more than 80% of the actual air miles flown. So it is representing the industry at large. In the beginning, governments didn't quite know how to organize or regulate the price for air travel, airfares. And so IATA was given antitrust immunity in order to do that. So one of the big functions it had in the beginning was to organize these legalized meetings of cartels where competitors would come into a room and figure out how much it ought to cost to fly from point A to point B. It did that for decades, without any question, without any objection. Of course, it was totally anti-competitive. It meant that the cost of flying was quite high until we began to see the beginnings of liberalization during the Carter administration. That continued to be the rule. So now, of course, IATA is out of that business. It's not fashionable to set prices in concert in a room somewhere. It's all being done competitively now, and the net result, of course, is that many, many more people are flying than could ever fly before. IATA maintains a suite of back office systems. When you buy a ticket from a travel agent, that money has to go from the travel agent to the airline at some point. IATA facilitates that on a global basis again. So travel agents are actually part of an IATA system. Consulting, training, a whole host of products and services that are provided to airlines are also part of the suite of activities that IATA engages in. It's engaged in safety. To be an IATA member, you must submit to a pretty thoroughgoing safety inspection by a contractor that IATA has in order to maintain your membership in good standing. So it is a force for good in the aviation industry, which is itself a force for good. One of the things that it is looking at increasingly, as you would well expect, is PNT, GNSS. Could I have the next slide, please? So there's a lot going on in aviation, simply because, as you would expect, aviation depends so heavily on GNSS. And I must say, you know, hearkening back to the conversation we had about limiting access to some systems and not allowing access to other systems, that's a concept that the aviation industry would strongly object to. I mean, you can't be in the business of flying around the world if, in fact, you can't take advantage of every GNSS that's available to you everywhere. There's a lot of activity in aviation going on because GNSS is so important to the industry today. So there's collaboration among a whole host of aviation-related industries, all of which are listed there. Next slide, please. IATA has put out a so-called safety risk assessment, which is associated with RFI, radio frequency interference. RFI, of course, has been a problem for aviation long before there was anything like GNSS. Aviation has depended on clean spectrum and clean transmissions practically from the get-go. So RFI interference has long been an issue, but now, of course, it is focused quite specifically on interference with GNSS. That's a quote from the report, which notes that flight management systems, terrain avoidance warning systems, enhanced ground proximity warning systems, all of these safety applications that are routinely found in all commercial aircraft today depend to a great extent on GNSS. Next slide. This is, I guess, more from that report, looking at a whole host of things that are recommended. Regulatory control of interference emissions, things that we've been talking about here, are extremely important to aviation, as you would expect. Identification and localization of interfering sources, the maps that you were just looking at from Dana's presentation, all of that is plugged into the aviation system today, such that when there is an anomaly, we know that there are a lot of anomalies over conflict zones, but when anomalies show up anywhere, it's really critical to the international aviation system and even to domestic aviation systems that those anomalies are identified. You will have seen probably in the news that the FAA has warned and other, I should say, CAAs have warned airlines to turn off their GNSS receivers when they are flying over conflict zones or any other place that's been identified as being afflicted by RFI, radio frequency interference. There are minimal operational performance standards proposed. All of this is designed to ensure the integrity of GNSS as applied to commercial aviation. Next slide, please. Again, this is just more from the report. There are recommendations in the report. I won't go over all of them by any means. For not just airlines, but for ANSPs, which are the air traffic control organizations, for IATA itself, for governments, for ICAO, and even for other associations. Next. The last thing I'll report on is that in January of this year, in fact, exactly 3 months ago, in Cologne, which is the headquarters of the European Aviation Safety Agency, there was a workshop, a cooperative workshop done by EASA and IATA to discuss spoofing and jamming and the effect of spoofing and jamming on aviation. More than 120 people came from all of the stakeholders, and the idea was to figure out a way to make GNSS more more resilient than it is for aviation purposes. So, you know, the culture of aviation is one that is based on a concept I learned in the military. It's called zero defects. There should be no crashes. Aviation is an incredibly safe industry today. We haven't had a fatal crash in international aviation, I should say in the United States, since 2009, despite an awful lot of flying, to the extent that aviation is so reliant on GPS, GNSS generally. You can imagine the importance that aviation places on clean spectrum, resilience in the system, making sure that there are either no anomalies, or if there are anomalies, they are identified in a way that they can be overcome. So that is, I think that's the end of the briefing. Is there another slide after that? Oh, this is just reporting on the outcomes. It's guidance, pretty straightforward, just calling upon all of the stakeholders to continue to focus on this activity and develop more solutions. So I'm pretty sure that is it, right? Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you very much. Questions?
Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot. We have at least two very important issues to deal with before we close. The first is to look at the wording and the recommendations and then prioritize and figure out what we do with them. And with that, I think we've got it queued up. We're going to point at somebody. I will point at AJ. AJ will point at somebody. And what's her name? Sarah. Sarah, if you could put something up. Okay, here is the first recommendation. So, who actually wrote this? Did you write this, Jeff?
The headline was courtesy of General Shelton, actually. Yeah, it was part of my brief.
Okay, but this is, all right. Okay. So ownership of this right now, I am attributing to you with great joy and comfort, and so why don't we take a look at this one? Why don't we just, everyone just read it?
Maybe whoever is responsible for the wording can help explain things a little bit. I mean, formally centralized and fully empowered can mean a lot of different things. Does that mean all the funding for anything PNT related, civil military comes from it? Is there funding? Is there, what is the actual role, responsibility, and authority of what we're proposing here?
Well, the concept of fully empowered meant all of the above. We have lots of coordinating bodies within government. We're all familiar with them, and one could argue that that's exactly what we have right now in PNT. We have the XCOM. What's not clear is whether the XCOM has the authority to do anything itself. The funding goes to the agencies that are participating, much of it to DOD. If there's to be a single source of effective PNT leadership within the government, it is going to have something close to that sort of funding responsibility.
So this is a PNT czar for the entire nation?
Yeah, and that's why I said yesterday morning, it's a big ask. I mean, it's an overhaul. This may be more than it makes sense to recommend. I don't know. I just thought we might as well put something ambitious on the screen and see what the group thinks.
So if I might, yesterday we did talk perhaps about maybe having a category of conclusions or observations from the group without necessarily a recommendation. And this would actually kind of tee up the so what, and that would kind of lead to where do we think we need to drive to with a little bit more focus and deliberation on this topic.
I think that's a very helpful comment, and it's sort of what I was trying to say earlier, probably not very clearly, which is what we really need to do is get people thinking about this stuff. Maybe the recommendation itself is too specific, too hard, and is a bit of a fool's errand. But shouldn't we be thinking about the need for a centralized source of authority and make that the kind of recommendation we're talking about?
This reads like a finding rather than a recommendation with an action verb. This reads like a finding rather than a recommendation with an action verb.
I tend to react to it that way as well. I think if the statement was, please organize yourself and appoint a czar, then I'd understand it as a recommendation. This sort of sounds more like an observation of what is required, and I don't know if anyone else sees that distinction, but
there is a distinction, and again, maybe it is consider the need for.
This is an urgent observation, is it? The urgent observation is we can't figure out who the hell's in charge. Isn't that sort of, we won't word it quite that way, but.
Well, if I might, the subject of this is PNT governance within the United States. Offering an observation says, look, the world has really changed since this apparatus has been stood up, if you will, and it's totally inadequate to the challenges we're facing. Simply stating that then will almost beg the question, so what do you do about it? Which would be a logical thing to say, and this will be one of the topics that gets pursued going forward.
Okay. First of all, does everyone agree that we can modify this from a recommendation to an urgent observation? Secondly, I hereby appoint you, if you don't mind, to coming together with some modification of wording as necessary. Could you do that? And try to get it back to us, circulate it to everyone. I think we've announced to the public what the sense of this board is, and a little word adjustment is certainly within the scope of what we're doing. Does everyone agree with that?
So if I could offer that our last slide from CER, because we talked about this at the CER thing and we presented that yesterday, our last slide talks about communicating this idea in terms of whole of government effort needed, good work going on, current PNT governance unsuitable for a changed world, imperative China losing the PNT race to, or U.S. losing the PNT race to China, et cetera. So I think, let me just offer that last slide to you as you develop that.
Okay, it is so offered, and the next step will be whether this is included, whether the chairman wants to include some reference to this in his two-page memo or not. And we will leave that up to him. But if he doesn't, we still want to make this a matter of record and ensure that it is somehow communicated. Does everyone agree with that?
And geopolitical importance, just one typo to fix.
Well, we have one of the world's greatest readers over here.
So in the context of the Federal Advisory Committee, this would be a finding that we agree upon, but it's not accompanied by a specific recommendation. Is that the point?
I think that's where we are.
That's fine. Perfect.
Okay, if everyone agrees, move on to the next one, please. We do have. And I think in this case, I would like us to, there should be a background that says we recognize that activities are going on, but we are in a little bit of a quandary because we don't know what exactly they're planning to do.
It sounds like a finding also.
It sounds like a finding too. Well, the non-finding is that the XCOM, to the extent they can, expedite this process. whether that rises to the level of a former, it seems to me, is Jeff still here? Hi, Jeff. I've been picking on him for 2 days. A finding would be that this is still our strong recommendation, and we're dismayed that it hasn't moved forward faster. Does everyone agree with that? Did you capture those words, AJ? All right.
Yeah, I worry that the example is certainly obscure based on the acronyms and kind of a corner case. I think the first bullet is stronger without bothering the example.
Okay.
We already made the recommendation. I think the finding is we remain concerned about the action.
That's fine. Okay.
Okay, Tim.
As the originator of that example, that was offered yesterday that we should do even more examination into ITAR and what might be impeding. We went with a recommendation about SERPAs. It happens that in the section on SERPA, it talks about angle of arrival limitations. We didn't make a recommendation to take that out, at least not in our white paper. So maybe we need another white paper. I'd also like to tell everybody now that I'm aware that in the industry there's a lot of research going on navigation radars. Like weather radar manufacturers are looking at things like Doppler measurements and other things that could be used to aid inertial navigation systems. And they'll run afoul of ITAR because ITAR has limitations on waveforms and such for low probability of intercept. So this is an area that deserves more study.
And I think I pointed out that what I had heard is, and I believe I read it when I cumbersomely read through, that the deep integration with inertials seemed to be somehow constrained, which to me is another real travesty. I mean, it's not like you're limiting some enemy who's never heard of it or wouldn't have the skill to do it. They may not be very good at implementing it, but they sure as hell understand it. And, some of those thousands of engineers, some of the other countries of the world would do that. Okay, so this is going to now be simply not a recommendation, but a reinforcement of the urgency of doing this, and we will offer a few words for incorporation in the memo if he sees fit. Okay, next one, please. How do we feel? Does this rise to the level that it should be incorporated in the memo, or do we incorporate it as a summary of our meeting?
Is this a supplement to the original recommendation to do HARS, or is it?
It appears to be.
So I would revise the HARS recommendation to do HARS and include Galileo.
Okay, then I think the way that would be done is this is an updated recommendation. Who is responsible for rewriting it? Your hand is raised, Frank.
I'll raise my hand because there's a couple of things too. So we discussed this in the subcommittee, and I think the consensus was that beyond GPS and Galileo, anything else would make it less likely that this would get funded, because mentioning Beidou, even though the intent is, if you tracked it, it's better, but just mentioning it adds some toxicity that people will kind of recoil from if you're going around asking for money from some government service. So that was the there was the majority, but not the unanimous consensus of the committee, in my opinion.
Okay, Tim has a comment.
I like the way this is worded because it's ambiguous. I don't think we need to go in and say, do this and not that at this point. And just the concept that we're going to provide corrections for other constellations is a good place to start. And then,
And stop.
yeah, and then let them sort out which ones.
I tend to agree with that. I would tend to come down that we want to hear the corrections to Beta Owl because that's also an indication of whether there's some attempt to fool us. But I don't think we want to get into that at this level. Yeah.
Is this gilding the lily and maybe counterproductive? I mean, it seems to me the HARS idea is well accepted, and government's moving at its own pace to make it happen. This seems to be adding another layer of complexity, possible things for people to object to or be concerned about or not understand. So not that this is wrong or bad, but maybe we should just leave well enough alone because it's not broke and it seems to be going along okay.
It isn't clear to me it's going well. I think it's going very slowly.
Yeah, I think we're in the same situation here that we are with the ITAR, where the government has indicated that something is happening, but we don't really have any visibility into what and when. Maybe that becomes a similar finding, that we understand the government is thinking about HARS, and we're eager to understand more about what's actually going to happen.
Yeah, I think that would be good as opposed to making, building more on what we did.
And at the same time, urge them to move ahead with what is obviously for the benefit of many, many users. Okay? So the suggestion, anyone object to the, sorry, Mike, go ahead.
Could I thought we were heading in the direction of trying to make a strong, emphatic recommendation to actually create a government-sponsored program to implement this as part of our overall integrated PNT capability for the nation.
Well, the point that's being raised, I agree, but the point that's being raised is that we have already done this. We've already recommended this.
Well, should we remind them? I still don't remember where it was that somebody got the rose pinned on them to say, okay, we've got this great stuff going on. How are we marching to creating a program to actually deliver this, not unlike WAS, that is a fully funded and active program that the government stands behind?
So
okay.
I hate that everything takes 6 months because that's how we get together. But I would offer that what we're doing is saying you need to get your act together and have a program, and then as a part of that program, here are all these other things that we think should happen as a part of that program. But first you have to have the program so you can execute this stuff, right?
Should that be the entering point is to strongly recommend creating and defining a program that the government intends to provide this as a service.
Creating a government program for GPS Plus or resilient architecture, whatever you call it, and as evidence of the fact that the government needs better governance and doesn't really have its act together, are all these things that need to be done and are kind of bubbling along on idle that need to be accelerated because you don't have your act together yet.
Okay. There's a lot of subordinate things here, but the first point would be is strongly recommending a program get defined to actually implement this.
Well, perhaps we have an observation that we don't see any expedited action going on our recommendation, and that we would again point out that they need to have leadership, funding, and a schedule.
And the thing that this draws attention to the accuracy, and what we've seen over the last 6 months is that it's the resilience of the proposed system that really is resonating. So, we've got this letter from Apple specifically pointing that out. They're not saying, hey, give us an extra 1 meter accuracy. They're saying, give us the resiliency by having the nav message. So I feel like that's the big information, and what Mike is saying. We want to push on what we've already recommended before adding these extra.
Okay, I can sense we've got another subcommittee going on here between you and you. Could you join hands and
I'm happy to contribute.
come up with something? Could I delegate that to you?
So, what to me is the question is there any opposition to the idea of saying emphatically there needs to be a program for a multitude of reasons that get cited here, and we see no evidence that a program is getting defined for this?
Go ahead, JJ.
I just want to support General Hamill 100%. We are socializing this. We've made a lot of progress. We've got traction, but we are not there yet, and now is not the time to back off.
Okay, with that as guidance, I would like to suggest that we, as a board, nominate our subcommittee. This is a restatement of a recommendation, not a new recommendation, but it has a greater sense of urgency, and furthermore, we are sensing there's a lot of industry support for it. Is that, okay, all right. Sure.
What is the significance of that word "also" in that first sentence? I think by itself it stands out pretty well. The word "also," I'm not sure if it reflects anything. Nothing's happened yet, right?
I think also might be
So you can
changed to ensure the tracking.
Isn't this moot? I thought, I mean, what did we just decide? That General Hamill and I will come up
That's
with a
right.
statement?
You got it.
So isn't this statement moot?
Or hereby delegated, consider the comment that was just made, please.
Right.
Okay, let's go to number 4, I think.
It's moot.
I'm hoping. Ooh.
While Sarah's bringing that up, I just want to point out what seamless support we've had for projecting slides during these days. It's just amazing how you guys come through.
Yeah. Well said. Thank you.
So I wrote these in the traditional recommendation format. This is the first one that we discussed extensively yesterday.
I think we've discussed it enough. We know what we are asking for. This is a great way to word it. It might be that this is an addendum or a footnote to the headline, which is the recommendation itself.
Yeah, in my opinion, it's worthwhile having these individual recommendations still be endorsed by the board, even if they take a different form in the letter, because this way we can point to them in the future as something that the board has endorsed.
Okay, as I see it, this is our first, we haven't had another that we decided was a recommendation, have we?
Yeah, the education one yesterday.
No. I thought we ended up saying that we were going to have a set of these that were the current urgent ones, the other ones not of lesser importance, but perhaps of lesser urgency. And that the education fell in that category, but I'm not certain we got buy-in.
So my understanding was that we still agreed on the education one.
Right.
Whether that gets forwarded as part of the letter or not is a different topic.
Precisely.
Okay.
Okay, so is everyone okay with this? And okay with the fact that it's going to be summarized possibly, hopefully, in our chairman's letter, right? And you've got the ding-dong on that part. Okay. All right, next one, please. Incidentally, thanks, John, for getting these together like this. Okay. There was quite a bit of conversation on this one and whether it was dual or triple frequencies. It's the third bullet that counts. I don't have any trouble with that recommendation. Does anyone?
This is just for purposes of the U.S. government? Is that what I'm reading there? Agency CIOs only?
There's two parts, direct federal CIOs to do it, and because that's where the government can actually direct things to happen, and then DOT and DHS should actively encourage critical infrastructure users to do the same thing. That's the second sentence in the recommendation.
And so what would you say to my former mates at IATA?
Yes, this needs to say non-safety of life.
Okay.
Okay. So the two complement is for non-safety of life GPS use.
Yes.
Got it? I'm sure AJ's got it. Okay.
Matt, it doesn't say
something wrong.
restrict to 2, but I think that 2 ought to be the minimum, and if people want to do 3, that's great.
Well, it worked this time, huh? Is it going to be, I don't know what everybody thinks, but rather than whether it's 2 or 3, can we just say multi-frequency and let the government, let the developers decide that? Multi means at least 2, right?
I don't have a strong opinion about that.
Would that work for you?
I'll be glad to modify it to say multi-frequency, non-safety of life. Thank you.
Okay, for this one, the wording on the formal is left in your hands, John.
Okay.
Okay? And the wording on the summary is left in your hands. Okay?
Karen reminds me that we're talking about critical infrastructure that's non-safety of life.
Yes,
Is it
exactly.
That's right.
not a contradiction in terms?
Well, it's perhaps a subset of crystal.
There are 16 sectors, and not all of them are safety of life sectors.
Agriculture is not safety of life. Agriculture is not safety of life.
Certified safety of life?
Yeah, I want to argue that if you say safety of life, what is law enforcement? Are they safety of life or not? Because they should be adopting the use of dual frequency.
We'll say certified safety of
Okay,
life.
okay, I like that.
Okay.
Maybe, oh, there we go. I think we discussed this topic a little bit yesterday during I think when John was presenting, and I highlighted that there's a burden on the end user, and we're talking critical infrastructures, to test and verify and also maybe upgrade their system. So I don't see any issues. Now, I don't know how you wanted to rephrase the word safety, but I'm thinking on the energy side, I don't see any issues as long as it's reliable and they're going to test it. So I don't know the word safety in this case. It signifies, but I did hear at the end something about life-threatening safety or something. Then that's a different thing. Yeah.
Yeah, so the aviation community goes through a very sophisticated and complicated certification process. That they will do this in their own time. We're not recommending that this be done this year. So that's why we're saying not for certified safety of life applications.
Fair enough. Okay, Tim.
Why we're doing that.
Because otherwise you have a barrier to doing what we.
All it says is encourage critical infrastructures, people to use. We're already headed in that direction for aviation. So why are we carving it out?
All right, that's fine. If we just leave it like this, that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, all it says is encourage. It doesn't say do it this year.
Great.
It says the government should encourage you to do it as soon as you can. And facilitate would be another nice thing to have.
Okay. Okay. Is everyone happy yet? No, we're not quite happy.
Sorry, is CIO in this critical infrastructure operators? Because I was reading this as chief information officers.
So the federal CIOs have their own PNT equipment, and so and they're not necessarily part of the critical infrastructure sectors. So we're recommending that federal CIOs do this as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Did we stagger to the finish line on that one? Let's do one more. Thank you. And here we're talking appointing an authoritative czar who is sanctioned by all the departments and ensure that that person can get it on. So, no, we had a side conversation. She has someone, can I say this? She has someone who is virtually in that role, but the question here is to get, or the issue here is to get all the departments lined up and say, support that person, he's in charge.
Well,
it's certainly related to it, but this is a relatively small part of the problem of total governance writ large. Yeah, you're right, but
This is a microcosm. This is a czar only for this piece.
And you could try to generalize it, but I think it's premature to try to do that. We've got to start to socialize the other major reorganization we're offering to the government. Oh, sorry.
So if I might, to me, it offered some language yesterday. John wonderfully tried to put this into a good form. To me, where the real thrust of this, I believe, needs to be, this actually has to be identified as a national capability. And there must be a program with an assigned authority and lead agency, and there needs to be an interagency operational process to it. Now, there's little elements out there, but nobody has that ownership or accountability right now.
Well, I think a lot of those pieces are in place, and it isn't for a lack of somebody wanting to be in charge. What this is doing is, in my opinion, is enabling and formally making that person the one in charge, and having the various departments say, understand, he's in charge, or she, and go do that.
So if I went, there's one more sort of element of this that I think is really important and is fairly consistent with, and that is with a laser focus on priority assigned to critical infrastructure applications, which immediately is going to raise the question, well, how do you bring that whole critical infrastructure, which is nominally under DHS's responsibility. So part of this is kind of forcing the question. It isn't just about, well, yeah, DOT's got some stuff going on here, but how do you bring in the full interagency programmatic and operational aspects?
Mike, I couldn't agree more. Is there wording on this that you want to change?
As I say, we kind of went through this. I think it would be very appropriate to say, okay, let's get three people to say, okay, we get the key elements we're trying to identify here, and to take credit for all the good things that are going on, but it's just not meeting the needs in terms of time and scope of what's involved here. And I don't care if you would disagree with that, but I don't think that either the DOD or DHS are anywhere near as invested as they need to be in this.
Well, I won't speak for them, but we're moving to having that common operating picture. And then what has to happen is those 24/7, operation centers, starting with two stops with their GPS warfighter cell, the FAA center, our Transportation Operations Center, Coast Guard Navigation Center, DHS, CISA, and FCC, all coming together. And that's part of the crucible process, that they all then, work when we have an interference event, and they all have that shared situational awareness, and then tackle to geolocate and then mitigate that source of interference.
So I would say one thing John added into this, which I think is really important. Again, all that's good, but the point is we know there are obstacles ahead. And so who is it's going to lead plowing through those obstacles? And those obstacles are going to exist in a variety of different agencies. So again, those are sort of the elements of at least what I would advocate should be what we recommend on this.
Well, look at the last sentence of the finding. That's an attempt to highlight exactly what you said. It maybe needs word adjustment, but
if this lands on somebody's doorstep, I'm not sure how they would react. Some of it would be is that, hey, we're working on this, and sort of my strong recommendation is we've got to somehow elevate this, say this is not even proceeding at a pace that's going to get us to a real solution until we know there's a program and, no kidding, a committed interagency operational response.
I'm trying to understand what modifications you are offering here. I might change it, clear responsibility and authority. I might want to add that.
Okay.
Does that help?
Yes. But
Yeah, and certainly General Himmel, we're happy to follow up with you offline and you know, brief you on the details and get, you know,
Okay,
feedback.
who's still got the typewriter? Do you still have the typewriter?
I can. You want me to change something fast?
No, I think I don't want to work this in
Okay,
real time.
I sent it to Mike.
we said, okay.
Okay, here's the clearinghouse. Oh, please. Greg, can you hear us?
I sure can. Howdy, everybody. Apologies for not being able to be there with you. And I tried to chime in yesterday during this portion of the discussion, but things were a little wacky out here in College Station. What I was just going to offer is, seems to me this is kind of a two-part observation/recommendation. There's the top line of the interagency coordination on interference monitoring, you know, and elimination. But there's a strong component that calls for law enforcement. You know, one thing I heard from FCC yesterday was their absence of an ability to have teeth when and if they, you know, detect a interfering event. They can knock on the door and ask the person to shut it off, but they can't confiscate it. So there is an element of law enforcement that's needed, and the civil agencies don't have that bandwidth. Yeah, FAA and FMCSA do have some enforcement in their portfolios, but it seems to me deputizing the U.S. Marshals, FBI, whoever, from a federal law enforcement perspective is what we need to put some teeth into the illegality, particularly jammers and spoofers operating, you know, within the borders of the U.S. Thanks. Over.
Yeah, I urge everybody to read the words that are there because it says this individual should identify current technical, legal, organizational, operational, and other obstacles, and then develop a plan and submit it to the XCOM to address them. So I really tried to take into account what we learned yesterday.
Well, you have including funding. You might add to that, including funding and proposed modification of the law or something like that.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of modifications that need to happen.
Yeah, but we might want to foot stomp the fact modifications to the law to grant authority to somebody to shut the dang things down. Okay, that good comment. Thanks, Greg. Yeah, here.
Report. I have a question. It may or may not be related, but when we had Mr. Ruskin here from DHS presenting, afterwards I had a discussion with him because one of the comments he made was during the February, I think it was February of last year when there was an incident in Denver area. He mentioned the only people that noticed it are the FAA, if you want to call it, or airline pilots. Airline pilots have a process in place that they can report these, but there is no process if anybody other than some agency monitoring it. So do we need to expand on this to say and establish a process for reporting? To my knowledge, again, I can only speak on one industry, and that's the energy. We are not aware of such a policy. I can tell you that independent system operators had noticed it.
Okay, let me point out here that we're asking the individual to identify current technical, legal, organizational, operational, and other obstacles. I think, you know, we could expand on that and try to tell them what to do, but the operational to me should be interpreted as including the reporting channels. Yeah, all right? And,
that's what I tried to do.
Yeah, I know.
It's okay with me. I just didn't
okay.
know. Yeah.
Yes, Renato.
Thank you, Chair. Just to be exact, do we need the word significant in the second line of recommendation? I believe this significance should be somehow defined, or simply to say that we need the activity regarding the mitigation of sources of interference. That's
Right.
it.
Let me say a possible modification is to change significant to harmful.
But every personal privacy jammer is harmful to the receiver that's 10
Exactly.
feet away from it. And so the idea was not to get to the point of chasing individual PPJs, but instead things that are starting to affect enough of the nation, enough of the economy, enough of a region that they merit attention.
You satisfied? Okay. Is this a recommendation that goes forward at the top level? I think it is.
I think it is.
Okay. Anyone opposed? So, do we have one more? Ta-da. Is there another one? Here we come.
Okay, this is just the update we just talked about. I tried to replace dual with multi everywhere just so that everybody can feel comfortable with the final result.
I'm comfortable. Let's move on.
Good.
So I think we are at the end of those portions of our deliberation. Yes, Jeff?
I apologize, but just to quickly go back to the very first slide, I don't know that we need it on the screen. Mike Hamill and I will take a look at the wording as you suggested, but I just wanted to point out that it was the second of two recommendations that I put forward on one slide in my briefing yesterday. The first one being the need for a declaration of policy, that this is a big deal. I don't know whether there's agreement among the board members that we need a fresh declaration of policy or not. But I just wanted to point out there was no discussion of that yesterday, and that was actually the primary point on that slide. We went in the slide you showed us this morning, just before, that was only the second.
What do you want to do?
I think Mike Hamill and I will figure out how to incorporate that. I mean, it's just part of the same thought, right?
Okay. Does anyone object to that approach? All right. Break. New subject. Where and when? And I know that yes. I think I heard you say that you want to be party to all updates so that you can ensure they're a part of our record. Any objections to that? In that case, please take that as a direction.
Yeah, let me write on that. So Admiral Allen, I think everyone is aware, really wanted to put the memo up and try to get a memo out this particular meeting. But we had a lot of good discussion. There were some new things brought up. And so I have been communicating with him back and forth, even as he's getting ready to do a national interview about some other items going on. So what we'd like to do is whoever is revising the text, and I know there are a number of people around the table that are going to be revising these 5 recommendations, we would ask that AJ and I are both involved in that process, because Admiral Allen is just going to ask us to give him a final copy that he can run past Dr. Parkinson and John Betts and so forth. So just please include us so that we can make sure we're synced, and then hopefully in a week's time we're ready to roll on that.
That's a great suggestion. Now, let's get to subject number 2. Alicia, you had indicated that in terms of the 2 October periods and the desire that we be somewhere within a short car ride of Washington, that may be in the too hard box because of both availability and expense, that the cost of doing anything in the Washington area is about double what we have to pay anywhere else. And even if you were to be able to pay that, getting that size of a block of rooms is problematic, but you're going to try. So we've been looking at alternative schedules, and unfortunately, as soon as you do that, and consider elections and some other things, we ended up on the 18th to the 22nd of November was one possibility. Well, and then the previous week, starts out with Veterans Day. One alternative would be to slide it to the 12th, the Tuesday instead of the Monday. I don't know if that's really helpful. The only week in November that looks like it would be reasonably clear is the week of the 18th, and evidently John is cavorting somewhere. Okay. Okay, I don't have any stock at Viking.
Build it around me, Brad. Whatever works.
That's true. So, what is the feeling on either the week of the 18th or the first 2 weeks in December? Is this poking anyone's eyes out? The week of the 18th of November or the weeks of the 2nd or the 9th of December. The 9th of December sounds great. And the reason that we were trying to move it to the October date or put it at that's about 6 months from where we are now. And it's like control systems with large built-in delays. They're always unstable. Well, I'm offering as an alternative a meeting at Vandenberg and look at the backup master control station. The fact that that happens to be 35 minutes from my home doesn't have anything to do with it.
And it's the heart of wine country.
Yeah, it's the heart of wine country. Really good wine.
What was wrong with the week of the 2nd?
I don't know. Does anyone have a problem with the week of the 2nd? Okay. The week of the 2nd. Okay, so we're homing in on the week of the 2nd. We've got to cross-check with our chairman because I'm hoping he's going to be there. I think some of us at least still have a strong feeling we should be within a 45-minute to an hour car drive of Washington. And that's so that we can entice people to more widely participate. Sorry? No, preferably outside the Beltway. Inside the Beltway, nothing good happens, Dana. I'm kidding. All right. Strike that from the record. All right. No, I think we should give Alicia a free license to be somewhere in the vicinity, and vicinity should be treated in a fairly open way. I'm including Baltimore, maybe Annapolis. We've had good luck with our meetings there in terms of venue and comfort, et cetera. But obviously, number one is, unfortunately, if we can get something affordable within the Beltway, that's fine, in my opinion. But ignoring Dana. All right. Yes, sir.
Personally, I don't have any issues. I just want to make sure December 2nd is the Monday after the Thanksgiving week. Flights are going to be pretty tight. I just want to make sure that everybody is aware, even if, particularly because we're going to be arriving early, like Sunday, right? So
I think
I'm okay. Personally, it's not.
What we've done before is to slide it a day, and instead, by sliding it a day, it forces our return travel on Friday, which has its own set of problems. But with enough warning, it may be that that's okay. How does everyone feel? All right, then let's make it nominally the 2nd through the 6th. Well, take a look. If the sun is shining, maybe it's okay. Come on, what are you doing? What are you doing?
I told you, we're at the UN in October.
You're cahoots. He's in cahoots. Okay. Wow, you guys are tough, I tell you. So the setup would be 4 is working sessions, 5 and half day of 6 are the formal board meeting. 3, if there are things that our tradition has been to try to arrange something loosely related to PNT. So I would suggest to AJ if he can think of something great. There are some fun places to visit. The Naval Observatory, by the way, where time is kept, is a really interesting tour, and it is tied directly to PNT Advisory Board. I will tell you, I first went there in 1955 as a midshipman, and it was fascinating to me then. But at any rate, if you can offer alternatives to come a day early and actually travel on the Monday afterwards, that would be fine.
If we do the meeting in December, I will get us White House tours with all the lights up for whoever's interested.
Okay, well, that's certainly a great option. Okay.
We don't have to go to the Naval Academy, do we?
I'm hoping. Every year or two, we try to do that. Do you have objections to going to one of the senior academies?
We proposed before this that everybody might be interested in going to the nation's premier academy.
Oh, for heaven's sake.
It's just 10 miles from here.
Yeah. This meeting is deteriorating. I think we're at the end. I'm hoping we're at the end. So first of all, let me again thank you all. I have such enormous respect for every one of you, and it's always fun, frankly. This is always in the nature of not only a meeting, but also a reunion, and candidly, it's great to have a little reunion of people I respect. I think we're done. Can I whammer? No. Oh, agenda item.
I just wanted to note one thing. So Leisha and her team.
Oh, gosh, yes.
After 17 years of working together, we just received an award, Agency Honor Award, which is pretty big. They're very competitive, from Senator Nelson and Pam Melroy. So I could not have done it without Leisha and AJ and their team. So thank you very much.
And an additional thank you for this particular meeting. And there have been some challenges, but you've met every one of them. So can I whack it now?
Yes, sir.
Done.